Hello again, and welcome to Boring History for Sleep, where the candles flicker low and history whispers softly. Tonight we tiptoe into Victorian England, not to chase steam trains or scandal, but to meet the quiet souls who made a living, doing almost nothing at all. So fluff your pillow, close your eyes, and let's wander slowly through the gentlest jobs of a bygone world. Hey guys, tonight we begin with something rather unusual, something slow, misty, and just a little squishy. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a marshy riverbank in the softest light of dawn. The grass is damp, the air smells faintly of mud and crushed mint, and not even the birds have started complaining about the day yet. You're bundled in a wool cloak that smells faintly of the sheep it came from, and in your chilled hands a shallow wooden bowl. You're here to collect leeches. Yes, leeches. Not the most glamorous job perhaps, but trust me, this is one of the most soothing professions Victorian England had to offer. While everyone else is hammering nails in a factory, scrubbing coal soot from chimneys, or boiling laundry in a screaming back kitchen, you're wading barefoot and unbothered into a quiet pond. And all you have to do is stand there. Leech collecting was a real thing. A slow, oddly meditative job that paid just enough to survive and rarely required conversation. The best part, the leeches did all the work. You didn't need to hunt or trap or chase, just a bit of patience and exposed skin. Leeches, it turns out, were big business in the 1800s. Victorian doctors loved them maybe a little too much. The medical field was still happily convinced that draining a little blood could fix everything from headaches to hysteria. And while that sounds like something from a medieval horror story, it was just another Tuesday for most barbers and apothecaries. Of course, to keep up with demand, they needed people to supply them with fresh, wriggling inventory. That's where you come in? Your morning begins before sunrise, not because you're a morning person, but because that's when the leeches are laziest. You trudge down to the stream or marsh, usually the same spot you've been visiting all season. You know where they hide under reeds around rocks between your toes, and you know how to charm them. Some collectors would let the leeches latch on, wait patiently as they swelled up like little bloated sausages, and then gently peel them off into a bowl. Others brought old livestock to wade into the water, particularly sheep, and let the animals attract the leeches instead. Victorian outsourcing at its finest. Your hands move slowly, methodically. You barely make a ripple. Time here doesn't tick, it sighs. No factory whistle, no yelling overseer, no chimney soot. Just the soft plop of frogs, the flicker of dragonfly wings, and your own breath slow and steady as your bowl gradually fills. You might be standing for hours. Maybe you hum to yourself. Maybe you think about lunch. Or maybe you just listen to the splash of a distant heron, to the wind brushing against rushes, to the faint squelch of your boots when you shift your weight. It's one of those rare moments in Victorian life when nothing is urgent. Now historians still argue whether leech collecting was a profession in the proper sense. There were no uniforms, no guilds, no annual wages, but it was reliable work, especially for women in rural areas. Elderly widows, single mothers and teen girls often turned to it as a way to earn coin, without leaving home or answering to a man in a waistcoat. Some wore thick cloth around their legs to protect against bites. Others didn't bother. Better than starving, they'd mutter half proud, half resigned. And leech collectors had their own tricks. Some swore by cloudy days, others by moonlit mornings. Some brought salt just in case a particularly enthusiastic leech decided to explore more private terrain. You learned early on to move slowly. A sudden step could send your entire morning's work slithering back into the muck. Calm was your currency. A successful collector might catch dozens a week, sometimes more if the weather stayed cool. You sold them to travelling buyers, often shady-looking men with tin canisters and too many pockets. Payment varied. A dozen fat, lively leeches could buy you a loaf of bread and a half-pound of tea. Not much, but enough. Especially when your only real expense was a clean rag and the occasional cup of vinegar to rinse your hands. You came to know your pond the way a violinist knows their instrument. You memorised its softest banks, its muddiest corners, its secret trails between tree roots. You knew which birds nested nearby, and which frogs were bold enough to hop onto your feet. and in those quiet hours before the rest of the village woke you, learned something else, the value of stillness. There was dignity in the solitude. Leech collecting may not have impressed aristocrats, but it kept food on the table. And compared to coughing your lungs out in a textile mill or getting caught in the gears of a printing press, it felt almost luxurious. At least here in the reeds, the world whispered rather than shouted. Of course there were challenges. Sometimes a leech would vanish into your clothing and make itself at home. Sometimes it would bite in a place that made you walk funny for the rest of the day. And once in a while an eager young apprentice would scream and thrash about, scaring away every potential catch in a half-mile radius. But mostly it was quiet work for quiet people. You didn't make friends, you made routines. Wake early, collect, walk home. Boil porridge, clean wounds, nap. Repeat. There was a rhythm to it, a simplicity that made the world outside seem a bit ridiculous. Why chase carriages or gossip when you could chase sunlight across the pond? So tonight, as your eyelids grow heavy and the worries of your modern life start to drift, imagine yourself there in the still morning fog, feet in cool water, hands cradling a wooden bowl. The leeches slow and sleepy drift toward your warmth like tiny misunderstood puppies. You don't flinch, you just breathe steady and calm. Because here in your tiny corner of Victorian England, you're not rushing, not stressing, not worrying about emails or alerts or bills. You're simply standing in the water, quietly helping the medical profession in the weirdest, most peaceful way imaginable. And yes, there may be a dozen slimy things clinging to your legs, but you've had worse Mondays. By the time your legs are dry and your bowl of leeches is safely tucked away in its tin canister, the rest of the town is just beginning to stir. Horse hooves clatter faintly on cobblestones. A chimney belches its first breath of smoke. And somewhere nearby, a sleepy baker mutters something unprintable about dough that rose too much overnight. But you're already moving on to your second task of the week. You adjust your coat glance at the brightening sky and begin the climb, not metaphorically, physically. You're headed for the highest point in town, the clock tower. It rises like a stone sentinel above the square, quiet and watchful, with ivy curling near its base and pigeons patrolling the ledges. At street level, it's just another part of the background, but up close it hums with the slow dignity of an old giant. You unlock the narrow wooden door with a key as heavy as your breakfast and step into the dim, spiralling stairwell. The stone staircase winds upward like a snail shell, each step a slightly different size than the last, as though the architect designed it while holding a grudge. The air inside is still cool and scented with ancient dust and faint brass oil. The deeper you climb, the quieter the world becomes. Footsteps become whispers. The sound of your breath grows almost comically loud. You are the town's clock winder. Once a week, always the same morning, you climb this tower to win the great brass mechanism that keeps the hours. It's not a glamorous job, but it's yours. And it offers something precious in Victorian England: silence, predictability, and the satisfying click of gears doing exactly what they were designed to do. At the top, the clock chamber awaits an airy, wooden-floored room filled with the bones of time itself. Wooden beams crisscross overhead, framing the great metal heart in the centre, the winding mechanism. Two massive iron weights hang from long chains, balanced like sleepy giants, waiting for your touch to wake them. You approach the crank polished smooth by generations of careful hands. It's heavier than it looks, but not unkind. You grasp the handle and begin to turn. Click, click, click. Each rotation draws the counterweights higher, restoring the tension that powers the gears. Slowly, the hands on the clock face shift forward with reverence, acknowledging your presence. You work at a pace that would make a factory foreman weep, but there's no one here to rush you. Only pigeons, and they're notoriously bad at timekeeping. You pause midway, letting your arms rest and listen. The ticking of the escapement is a kind of lullaby, mechanical, precise, eternal. It doesn't need you to rush, just to show up. Historians still debate whether clock winding was viewed as skilled labour or humble janitorial work. Some towns assigned it to trusted tradesmen. Others passed it through generations, like a family heirloom with a hinge and a dial. But all agreed on one thing: the job mattered. A late clock meant late sermons, missed trains, overboiled eggs and chaos in the schoolroom. You, with your sleepy shoulders and slightly dusty trousers, held back that chaos one crank at a time. Once the weights are fully drawn, you check the alignment of the gears. You tighten a bolt that came loose last winter, smile at the tiny mouse hole near the far beam, and admire the simplicity of a world that runs on tension and gravity. It's mechanical poetry. Sometimes you sit by the open window and look out over the rooftops. On foggy days, the town looks like it's floating on clouds. On clear days, you can see all the way to the hills where the sheep pretend they're wild. You eat your apples slowly. The pigeons edge closer. You pretend not to notice. One of them, your favourite, is a plump fellow with a bent toe and a tendency to coo like he's had too much brandy. You've named him Arthur, although you suspect he's a Margaret. Names don't matter here. What matters is the quiet company, the predictable flutter of wings, and the fact that no one interrupts your thoughts. Your thoughts, it must be said, are not particularly ambitious. You don't dream of riches or recognition. You wonder if the baker will have the cinnamon rolls again. You remember a line of poetry you heard as a boy and try to recall the ending. You calculate how many pigeons could fit inside the gear housing before someone would notice. Time passes the way it always does up here, slowly, gently, respectfully. The clock does not shout, it whispers. And when your work is done, when every chain is wound, every cog is humming, and the great brass pendulum begins its slow swing once more, you lean against the wall for just a little longer than necessary. No one is waiting for you at the bottom. The town will not throw a parade for your punctuality. But deep down you know this, because you wound this clock the day below will proceed without complaint. The train will leave on time, the school bell will ring. The preacher will hit his sermon with satisfying precision, and you will have made it happen with nothing more than a crank a walk and an hour of solitude. You take the stairs down a little slower than before, each step creaking softly under your heel. You pause once to watch a spider dangle from a beam. You do not rush it. Outside, the town is stirring now. The market stalls are unfolding like giant fabric flowers. A dog trots by with a string of sausages in its mouth, pursued half-heartedly by a butcher. The sky has brightened from pewter to pearl. Time has resumed. You nod to the whirled hands in your pockets and melt back into the street. Tonight, when your room is quiet and your eyes begin to close, imagine that tower again. The stone cool against your hand. The crank steady in your grip. The pigeons rustling above. You are part of a rhythm older than any factory, older than any empire. A rhythm of springs weights and patient hands, and all you had to do was keep it turning. You've wound the clock, strolled past the baker's boy with flour on his chin, and let the morning unfold around you like steam from a fresh cup of tea. But now your feet carry you away from the chatter of the town square, and toward a quieter house, a still house. This is not a place for noisy boots or idle gossip. You pause at the threshold, wipe your hands on a clean cloth and knock softly. The door creaks open just enough for a face to peer through. Her eyes are rimmed with fatigue. She nods without a word and you step into the dim interior. You're a post-mortem portrait painter, and today, as on many quiet Victorian afternoons, you've been summoned to help a family say goodbye. It's not strange here, not like you might imagine. There's no thunder or ghostly wind. Just the hush of drawn curtains, a mantel clock ticking with soft resolve, and the faint scent of lavender water trying its best to cover the truth. A child is asleep in the next room. A kettle hisses on the hob, and in the parlour beneath a white cloth lies the one who's gone. The mother clasps her hands and explains with a quiet voice barely more than breath. "We never had the chance for a photograph," she says, "and now, well, this is all we have." You nod. You've heard these words before. You've heard them from weeping mothers, stern grandfathers, even from grown sons blinking fast to hold back their tears. Grief speaks in many voices, but the request is always the same. Make them beautiful. Make them remembered. You unpack your tools. A folding wooden easel, small tins of pigment brushes of different lengths. A palette smooth from years of use. You select your paper carefully, not too coarse, not too smooth, and test a stroke of ochre along its edge. You want warmth, you want softness. The deceased lies on a sofa body arranged with care hands crossed over the chest, eyelids lowered in perfect stillness. You lift the sheet back just enough to study the contours of the face. The cheeks are pale, the jaw gently slackened. You make a note of the dimple on one side, the shape of the nostrils. You do not flinch. Your job is not to paint death. It is to gently coax memory back into form. Outside, a cart rattles by. A dog barks, once then gives up. You adjust your angle, catching the light from the high window. You begin with a light sketch, nothing dramatic, just outlines. You always start with the curve of the brow. It tells you everything you need to know, age, temperament, sometimes even humour. The family sits nearby, not too close. The mother holds her daughter's hand. The father pretends to read a newspaper, though you notice he hasn't turned a page in 20 minutes. A teacup is placed beside you. The steam curls lazily, and you nod in thanks, not daring to stop your line once the pencil begins to glide. Post-mortem portraiture is one of those odd Victorian professions that feels unsettling to modern minds, but was deeply comforting in its own time. Photographs, while growing in popularity, were still expensive and hard to come by, especially for the working class. A painter, though, you could travel. You could adapt. You could soften the jawline, warm the expression, blur away illness. You could grant a final kindness. Some painters idealise their subjects, painting them younger, healthier, with flowers in their hair, or books in their hands. Others preferred realism, capturing the peacefulness of the final sleep. You work somewhere in between, not dishonest, but gentle. You paint not the dead body, but the echo of the living person. Historians still argue whether post-mortem art should be considered fine art, folk art, or funeral service. Some see it as morbid nostalgia, others as a rare instance of working-class families gaining agency over how their loved ones were remembered. You don't worry about the arguments. You're too busy mixing pigment. You move on to the shading. The cheekbones are delicate. The eyes, though closed, still require attention lest they flatten into lifelessness. You've learned tricks over the years. A touch of blue-grey along the lids, a faint warmth at the temples. You dab your brush in water and smooth the edge of the lips until they suggest the barest whisper of a smile. Not cheerful, just peaceful. Your subject today is a girl perhaps 17. The mother says she loved to sing. She shows you a songbook with faded corners, its cover embroidered with a lily. You ask if you might include it in the portrait. She nods, blinking fast. The father murmurs something about her laugh, how it used to echo up the stairs. You do not say much. You let them talk. Their words guide your brush more than your eyes do. By now your hand has found its rhythm. Your wrist barely moves. Your arm works from the elbow, long, slow strokes like a lullaby in motion. You hum softly without realizing it. A hymn, perhaps, or a waltz from a tune long forgotten. You pause briefly to stretch your back and sip the lukewarm tea. The room feels warmer now, though the fire hasn't been lit. Perhaps it's the closeness, the quiet breath of shared morning that thickens the air. Or perhaps it's your own body grounding itself in this still sacred space. The daughter stirs and whispers, "She would have liked this." You nod and add a small cluster of violets in the background, barely visible like a memory behind a veil. As you near completion, the features come together not perfectly, but intimately. You know this face now. You've memorized it in silence. You sign your initials in one corner, small and unobtrusive. You clean your brushes, pack your case, and carefully pass the painting to the mother with both hands. She doesn't cry at first. She only nods. Then she touches the image gently, like brushing a stray hair from the real forehead. The father exhales quietly. No applause, no praise. Just a long, quiet thank you spoken with the weight of true grief. You leave with the light fading outside. The street has returned to its usual rhythm, boys chasing hoops, chimney smoke curling skyward, the butcher calling out specials no one ever believes. But you're still in that quiet room. Your fingers carry the scent of pigment and lavender. Your ears still hear the tick of that solemn clock. This job doesn't make you rich. It doesn't make you famous. But it gives you something few others find in Victorian England: time to listen, time to look closely, time to give something back that cannot be bought or sold. Tonight, when your own room is dark and the wind brushes against your window, imagine the quiet of that house. Imagine the paper drying slowly on its board, the portrait glowing gently in candlelight, and a family gathered not around sorrow, but around memory. You gave them peace, and in doing so, you found a little of it yourself. The sun slips lower in the sky, now slanting through narrow windows and gilding the town's rooftops in late afternoon amber. The clatter of carts has quieted. School children have stopped shouting. Somewhere in a nearby alley, a cat yawns so widely it nearly tips over. It's the kind of hour when the world seems to hold its breath, not asleep, not quite awake, just suspended. And here you are again, slipping through that moment of pause with your next task. No paintbrushes this time, no heavy winding cranks or leeches squirming in a bowl. Today you carry only your voice. You're a letter reader. In a time when literacy was not a given, when many labourers, maids, farmhands and even grandparents never learned more than to scratch their name, you're a rare and precious thing. A person who can read aloud without stumbling, without judging, and without rushing through the words. You make your way down a narrow row of cottages where washing lines sag beneath petticoats and woolen socks, and the smell of cabbage stew competes with chimney smoke. At the third door on the right, you knock twice and wait. A woman opens the door with the kind of practiced caution that comes from years of bad news. But when she sees you, she brightens. "He's written," she says, clutching an envelope to her chest. You step inside, remove your hat and settle into the nearest wooden chair. A child peers at you from behind a cupboard door, and a kettle sings softly on the stove. She presses the letter into your hands like it's a holy object. You take your time. The envelope is creased and slightly damp. It smells faintly of tobacco and seawater. You open it carefully, smoothing the paper out on your knee. She sits across from you, her hands clenched in her lap eyes, fixed on your mouth. You begin to read. "My dearest Ellen," you've never met the man who wrote this letter, but by the second paragraph you know him. His handwriting is impatient but warm. His sentences wander. He makes a joke about the ship's cook, followed by a sudden earnest line about missing the way her stew always burned at the edges. You watch her face as the words settle into her ears, her chest, her memory. This is not your letter. But for a moment it passes through you, becomes yours, just long enough to deliver its weight. You finish reading. She wipes a tear quickly, offers you a biscuit in thanks. You shake your head, smile, and make your way to the next home. Letter readers in Victorian England filled a quiet niche between intimacy and necessity. For many, they were the only way to bridge the gap between those who had left soldiers, sailors, emigrants, and those who waited. You were a stand-in voice for distant husbands, lost fathers, wandering sons. It wasn't glamorous. You were paid in coins, food, hand-sewn mittens. But the real payment came in glances. The sharp inhale when a daughter hears her name. The nervous giggle when a sweetheart's compliment slips out too bold. The silence when bad news is cloaked in gentler phrasing. And no one asks you to reread that part again. Sometimes the letters were from the government. Cold, formal, stamped with black ink. You read those slower. You chose your tone carefully. You added a pause where no comma existed just to let the words fall softly. Other times you were asked to write the replies. You'd take down their words, edit gently as you went polishing grammar, adding flourishes but keeping the spirit. "Tell him I miss him," a woman might say, voice trembling, and that the dog's still fat and the garden still mostly weeds. You'd smile and write, "My darling, the garden grows wilder every day without you." The dog, however, grows fatter. Historians still debate how widespread letter readers were. Some think it was a regional custom, others believe it was an unrecorded profession passed hand to hand like a warm loaf on a cold street. What's agreed is that for many you were a lifeline, a bridge made not of stone but of syllables. Your voice became familiar in more homes than your name. You were trusted not for who you were but for how you spoke, slowly, clearly, without laughter unless invited, without judgment even when the letters included secrets not meant for a stranger's ears. You once read a letter from a man who confessed he had 2 wives, one in London, one in Devon. Neither woman interrupted you. One cried. The other handed you a plum tart and asked you to come again next week. Some families gave you a stool by the fire. Others asked you to stand as if that would make the words more real. Children stared at your mouth as if letters spilled from it like magic. In a way they did. And always there was tea, poured in chipped cups, sweetened with more sugar than anyone could afford. Sometimes with a biscuit, sometimes with nothing more than a smile. It was your unspoken fee, your thank you, your ticket back through the door. By evening your throat is dry. You've read 6 letters, written 3 replies, and been given 5 different names for the same mangy dog who seems to follow you from house to house. You make your way home slowly, the final light of day flickering against the cobblestones. The streets are calmer now. Lamps flicker to life behind lace curtains. A baby cries in the distance, soothed by the rhythm of a lullaby too soft to make out. And your pockets jingle faintly with half-pennies and lint. But you feel full, because today you gave people their loved ones back, even if just for a moment. You made distance feel smaller. You wrapped loss in warm vowels and hope in soft consonants. You let people hear the ones they missed. So tonight, as your own eyes grow heavy, imagine that final house. The warm light, the mother's grateful nod, the way her hand trembled when she tucked the letter into a worn book, as though it were treasure. And your voice, familiar, steady, kind, echoing just a little longer than needed. You didn't just read letters, you delivered pieces of hearts. Your day has stretched across rooftops, bell towers, parlours of morning and kitchens heavy with unspoken longing. But now, with the golden hue of evening folding into the slate blues of twilight, you enter perhaps the most peaceful space of them all. It's warm before you even open the door. Humid, rich, heavy with the scent of damp soil and citrus leaves. You push gently on the worn iron handle, and the great glass panels of the greenhouse door creak inward. The moment you step inside, your lungs fill with something almost forgotten green. You are the greenhouse keeper. In an age of soot-stained brickwork, grimy air and coal-smudged streets, this job is something of a miracle, an oasis in a jar. You've been hired by a gentleman of wealth, the sort who insists on palm trees in Yorkshire, and orchids that only bloom if whispered to in Portuguese. His estate sprawls across several acres, but it is the greenhouse, this long corridor of glass and wrought iron, that is your domain. Outside, the world is coughing and clanging and running late. In here, it is always early spring. You shed your coat already damp at the collar and roll your sleeves above your elbows. The air clings to you in the most affectionate way, like an old dog laying its head on your lap. Ferns rustle softly as you pass. A parakeet not native but somehow confident chirps once, and then resumes his silent judgment from a perch near the skylight. Your work is methodical, calming. You begin with the misters, great brass contraptions you wind by hand, sending a fine vapour into the air. It kisses the leaves and drips gently onto the stone floor. Then you move on to pruning your fingers, tracing the edges of papaya trees and banana fronds, pinching away anything yellowing, anything drooping. The plants do not speak, but you understand them. They sigh when overwatered. They shiver when too close to the door. The orchids, always the divas, require specific treatment. Not too much light, not too little. A breeze only in the afternoons. One of them, a rare violet variety, has bloomed overnight. You stop and admire it as if it had said your name. Historians often overlook the Victorian greenhouse in favour of industry and empire, but these structures were microcosms of hope built not only for status but for sanity. The outside world was changing rapidly, railroads, roaring slums, growing machines, grinding teeth into metal. Inside the greenhouse, things moved differently, slower, softer. They bloomed. You tend to a tray of seedlings, lemon balm, ginger root, and a shy little sprig of vanilla orchid, each one with its own personality, each one asking for just a little attention. You move down the rows, a watering can in hand, whispering the names of the plants like a litany. Your employer occasionally visits, dressed in a waistcoat too fine for soil. He points at leaves with his cane and nods as if he's responsible for their health. But mostly he leaves you alone. You like it that way. The plants are your real company. And unlike aristocrats, they don't question your methods. Once a visiting cousin of the master asked if the greenhouse was heated by magic. You smiled politely and pointed to the cast-iron stove in the corner, stoked daily by your own arms. You didn't mention the time the chimney nearly smoked out a whole section of lilies. Some things are better left out of polite conversation. You adjust a trellis that's leaning too far left, your hands dirt-streaked but gentle. A single beam of light slips through the glass overhead and lands perfectly on the mossy stones at your feet. It is a perfect moment, unremarkable to anyone else but quietly miraculous to you. There's a bench near the back hidden between a towering citrus tree and a row of climbing roses. You sit there sometimes when your work is done, just to listen. Not to birdsong or village noise, but to growth. The creak of a leaf unfolding, the plink of condensation dripping into the soil, the hum of warmth that seeps into your bones like tea on a cold day. You remember your first week here. You overwatered the passion fruit vine and it sulked for days. You clipped the wrong stem from a camellia bush and it bloomed crooked for a month. You've since learned. You've come to understand that caring for something living requires more than tools. It requires rhythm, presence, stillness. People in town don't know much about your work. Some think you're a gardener, others assume you're a servant who dusts flower pots. That's fine. Let them guess. You know the truth. You are a steward of calm, a quiet co-conspirator in nature's slow rebellion against soot and noise. There are days when you find yourself speaking to the plants. Not out loud, at least not when the staff are nearby, but in murmurs and nods. You praise a new bud. You scold a lazy fern. You tell the lemon tree that yesterday is sunny enough. It's not madness, it's a relationship. As twilight deepens, you make one last pass through the rows. You close the vents, secure the windows, and check the thermometer nestled beside the bromeliads. Everything is as it should be. You stand at the doorway once more, watching the condensation gather on the glass. The world outside is dark now, but inside a soft glow from the stove warms the air. The orchids sleep with their petals open. The air smells of damp leaves and quiet triumph. You close the door and for a moment you see your reflection in the pain hand's dirtied shirt, wrinkled but eyes calm. You are not just a worker. You are a keeper of light, of breath, of living silence. So tonight, as your own breathing slows and your thoughts begin to scatter like petals in wind, picture that greenhouse. The foggy panes, the rows of green, the way every leaf turned slightly toward you as you passed. The plants do not speak, but they remember, and tomorrow they will bloom for you again. By now the town has folded itself into a nighttime hush. Lamps flicker behind lace curtains. Cats return from their secret roots. Bread has cooled on windowsills, but you're not done just yet. Tonight's work is delicate, careful, entirely unhurried. You take a seat by the window in a cottage near the shore where the salty breeze slips in through a crooked shutter. Before you on the table lies a wooden box of shells, tiny, weather-smoothed, striped, speckled, curved like commas and moons. Beside them a dull pair of scissors, a glue pot and a row of half-finished trinkets. You are a shellwork ornament maker. You sigh, stretch your fingers and begin. Shellwork was once the pastime of sailors and sweethearts. But in Victorian England it blossomed into its own miniature art form, slow, quiet, and deeply soothing. You sit for hours piecing together these little wonders frames rimmed with cockles, keepsake boxes edged in oyster shell, tiny heart-shaped plaques with spiraled snail shells radiating like sunbursts. Nothing large, nothing loud, just small, careful things, each made with intention and patience. You start tonight's piece with a simple oval mirror, its wood backing faded, the glass spotted with age. You line the rim with pink scallop shells, alternating their direction like a silent waltz. One left, one right, one left. The rhythm begins to steady your breathing. Your glue brush makes a faint tapping sound against the glass jar. You hum something tuneless. Maybe it's from childhood. Maybe it's just a note the sea gave you. Outside you hear waves lapping the shore, soft, steady, constant. They sound like a memory you haven't named yet. Shells have been your companions for years now. You've learned to see them not just as decoration, but as individual characters. Some are bold, others shy. Some are so fragile that you hold your breath when picking them up. You remember where you found each one, the spiral cone at Whitby, the flat clam near Hastings, the sand dollar gifted by a widow who said it brought her luck. You never told her you dropped it and glued it back together. Your fingers move slowly, never rushing. Each shell is placed with care, pressed gently into its spot, turned slightly to catch the light just so. You use your pinky to wipe away excess glue. You blow softly across the rim to set the placement. Shellwork is not glamorous. It's not sold in galleries, but it fills gift shops in coastal towns, rests on mantelpieces in small parlours, and sits atop dressing tables next to perfume bottles and faded ribbons. People don't thank you by name, but they pause when they pick up your pieces. They turn them over, smile faintly and say, "Look at that." Isn't it sweet historians still debate whether shellwork should be considered folk art women's domestic craft or simply seaside kitsch? But you don't care much about labels. You care about that moment when the glue dries and the shells catch the lamplight like tiny moons. Some nights when the tide is out, you walk the beach by lantern and gather more materials. Not just any shells ones that speak to you. Ones with unusual ridges, unexpected colours. You keep a pocket knife in your boot for prying stubborn ones from rock crevices. You've learned to read the tides like a calendar. Low tide means treasure. High tide means tea. Once a wealthy visitor to town commissioned you to shellwork an entire music box. You spent 6 weeks on it. Your fingers cramped. Your back ached. When she returned to collect it, she barely looked at the detail. But later someone told you she kept it on her piano and smiled every time she passed it. That was enough. You work by lamplight. The light is golden soft. The room smells of brine and glue and the faintest hint of rosewater from the bowl by the door. A moth flutters near the flame. You gently shoo it away. Your dog snores at your feet. He's old like your scissors, both a little rusted, a little slow but dependable. You've named him Button, because once upon a time he swallowed a whole tin of them and lived to wag about it. You finish the scallop rim and move on to the inner circle, a spiralled arrangement of cowries. They're glossy like polished pebbles, and they reflect the lamplight in a way that makes them look wet, even dry. You lay them in a perfect spiral clockwise, each one nudged snugly against the next. Sometimes you wonder who will end up with this mirror. Girl in London, maybe, who's never seen the sea. A boy buying a gift for his mother. A sailor's wife who wants to feel the beach in her hands again. Whoever it is, they'll touch these shells. They'll feel the ridges, the curves, the cool surface. And without knowing it, they'll hold hours of your quiet, your breath, your care. That's the hidden magic of your work. No one sees the decisions, the replaced shells, the moments you pause to listen to the sea through a conch, even though you know it's just the blood in your ears. No one hears the song you hummed while setting the final row. But it's there, embedded between the glue and the shell. As midnight approaches, you stretch your arms, roll your shoulders, and place the mirror gently on the sill to dry. It looks finished. It looks like it's always been that way. Your hands are sticky. Your eyelids are heavy. You blow out the lamp, leaving just the moonlight and the sound of the sea. Tonight, as you drift into sleep, picture that mirror, that spiral, that circle of tiny treasures from the tide. You didn't just make an object, you made a pause, a stillness, a place where someone will see their face framed by pieces of the ocean. You made a moment, and you made it beautifully. The moon is high now, a pale coin, floating over chimneys and rooftops, casting long, slow-moving shadows across the cobblestone streets. Most of the town is asleep, or trying to be. There's a hush in the air, not silence exactly, but something close to it. A hush woven from the rustle of curtains, the creak of bed springs, the occasional bark from a dog in its sleep. But you're still awake, still working, or perhaps more accurately, still watching. Because your job is not one of motion, nor noise, nor even urgency. Your task, as strange as it sounds, is to be present, still, steady, invisible almost. You are the daytime watchman of a museum that rarely has visitors. And no, that isn't a mistake. Not a night watchman. You work during the hours when the sun is up, the children are in school, and the rest of the town is too busy living to bother with what's already passed. The museum sits on the edge of a square most people walk through without looking. It's made of weathered stone with a copper dome that's more green now than gold, and windows too tall for any practical reason. The kind of building that suggests importance even if no one remembers why. You arrive each morning just as the frost is melting on the steps. The front door requires a gentle nudge with your shoulder. To open, years of paint and humidity have seen to that. Inside, the air is always cooler than outside, even in summer. It smells of old paper polish and the faintest trace of coal dust from a fireplace no one has lit since Queen Victoria's third decade on the throne. The exhibits, modest. Nothing stolen from Egypt. Nothing on loan from Paris. Just a quiet collection of things that mattered once and have been waiting to matter again. There's a room of fossils, mostly small, mostly unlabelled. A hall of plaster busts, all of whom look vaguely disapproving. A gallery of military uniforms that seem to sigh under the weight of forgotten medals. And tucked in the far corner, an assortment of taxidermy that you try not to look at too closely after dusk. Your job isn't to clean them. That's for the part-time caretaker who comes in on Thursdays with a feather duster and strong opinions about Napoleon. Your job is simpler. You make sure nothing disappears. Of course, things never do. There are no crowds, no children pressing sticky fingers against glass. Sometimes days pass without a single soul entering the museum besides yourself, and that's fine. You like it that way. You make your rounds each morning. Slowly, thoughtfully. You straighten a frame here, flick dust from a label there. You nod respectfully to the busts, though they never nod back. You check that the cabinet containing a 12-inch narwhal tusk is still locked, it always is. You pass the large oil painting of a naval officer with a nose too large for his face and whisper as you always do. Still winning the war, I see. Sometimes your rounds take 15 minutes, sometimes an hour. Depends on how many times you stop to admire the 17th century map with the sea monsters, or to quietly hum along with the ticking grandfather clock in the vestibule. You spend much of your day seated in the wooden chair behind the front desk, a chair that groans like it's part of the exhibit itself. There's a visitor's book on the counter. The last signature was from 5 days ago. Before that, 10 days. You flipped through it once. Someone wrote lovely carpets. There are no carpets. Still you are there, watching. Some days a guest does arrive, a curious traveller, a local school teacher looking for inspiration. Once a man wandered in, stared at a faded portrait of a woman holding a tulip, sighed deeply and left without a word. You didn't ask. You never do. You offer pamphlets that are 10 years out of date. You answer questions when asked, and only then. You never hurry. There is no need. People assume a museum is a place to learn. You've learned it's a place to listen to the creak of ancient floors, to the sigh of a window not quite shut, to the flutter of a moth that somehow found its way in and is now exploring the glass dome above the Roman coin display. You've given them all names, the moths, the mice, the exhibits. Not out loud, of course. That would be strange. But in your head they all have lives. The Roman bust of the curly-haired youth with a chipped ear, that's Lucius. You think he was once admired by everyone but never took himself seriously. The taxidermy owl with the crooked beak, that's Professor Pudding. You greet him each morning and he stares back as if expecting tea. You once spent an entire afternoon watching sunlight move across a tapestry from Flanders. It began with gold and ended with silver. The scene never changed. A stag in a forest. A hunter frozen mid-step. But the light told a different story. A slower one. One most people never stayed long enough to notice. Historians don't write about museum watchmen. You won't find yourself in any ledgers, but you're there, every day. A guardian of stories no one is currently reading. A quiet presence among things long past. You don't wear a uniform, just a vest, a tie slightly askew, and a pocket watch you never check because the museum clock is always 10 minutes fast. You eat your lunch in the side room with the broken umbrella stand and the one chair that leans left. It's peaceful. It's yours. Once during a particularly long afternoon in February, you fell asleep upright behind the desk. When you woke, nothing had changed. The exhibits had waited patiently, the bus still judgmental, the fossils still silent. You apologised to Lucius and went back to work. The museum, you've come to realise, is a place that doesn't mind waiting. Waiting for guests, waiting for relevance, waiting for a curious child to tug at a sleeve and ask what a flintlock is. You're part of that waiting. A slow heartbeat in a building that's mostly bones. So tonight, as you lay your head down, picture that museum again. The hush, the dust motes in a beam of light, the rows of silent faces watching you with something like gratitude. They're still there. And so are you, keeping time, keeping watch, keeping history safe, not with fanfare but with stillness. You've seen the museum lights dim behind you, the cobblestones echo under your boots in the cool, hushed dark of the Victorian evening. Your day has been spent in the company of statues, sleeping plants, and letters that arrived long after they were needed. And yet your most peculiar task is still ahead. No hammers, no ledgers, no tools in hand. Just your body, your senses, and your sense of stillness. You're a professional bed tester. Yes, really. In Victorian England's grander establishments, where chandeliers swayed gently from ceilings tall enough to house a medium-sized lighthouse, and chambermaids moved like clockwork shadows, comfort wasn't just an ideal, it was a product. And behind that promise of luxury stood people like you, silent arbiters of softness, judges of springs and stuffing specialists in slumber. You work for the Royal Albion, a grand hotel wedged into the edge of a busy town. Its stone facade is dramatic but cracked with age, and ivy clings to it like a stubborn old aunt who refuses to let go of your sleeve. Gas lamps flicker just outside the heavy mahogany doors, casting warm pools of yellow light across the entryway, where guests' boots leave polite smudges on the tile. Inside, everything smells faintly of beeswax starch, and the lingering perfume of wealthy travellers, with too many trunks and not enough manners. You make your way up the back stairs, avoiding the main hallway where a French couple is currently arguing over a missing corset hook. The walls are lined with paintings of people who have never smiled not once in their entire oil-based existence. You nod to them. They disapprove of you, but then they disapprove of everyone. You arrive at room 204. The chambermaid nods, hands you a clipboard and the key. Single feather 2-pillow configuration, new mattress from Harrods, she says, with the clipped authority of someone who has made 37 beds today and would challenge a sergeant major to a duel if asked to make one more. You step into the room. It's quiet. Curtains half drawn. A gentle breeze pushes through the crack in the window. The bed sits in the centre of the room, proud and slightly puffed, like it's waiting for a review. You remove your boots, always your boots, and fold your coat over the chair. The mattress is firm at the edges, plush at the centre. You test it first by sitting. Slow descent, slight squeak, springs holding steady, no slump to the left, no groan of age. Then the real test. You lie down. Bed testing is not lounging. It is not resting. It is observation in disguise. You lie perfectly still, arms folded lightly over your chest, and let your body do the work. Is the mattress giving at the hips? Is the shoulder supported? Is the pillow too plump, too flat, too feather forward? Your neck says, not bad. Your lower back says, mild complaint right side. You turn over. Twice. You simulate a dreamer's twitch. You sigh to hear how the room responds. There's a faint echo off the armoire. The drapes whisper. A floorboard shifts beneath the window. None of it matters to most. But to you, it's data. The sheets crisp but not scratchy. Cotton count acceptable. You pull them up to your chin. The duvet rests just right. No excessive weight, no cold spots, no corners bunched in awkward rebellion. You breathe, you blink, you listen, and then perhaps most important of all, you close your eyes. Not to sleep. Not yet. To sense. You've trained yourself to detect a dozen small sins of bedding. A slightly overstuffed bolster, a hidden button, a lumpy seam. You once found a misplaced needle in a guest mattress before anyone else did, a fact that the head housekeeper still mentions with reluctant admiration. As you lie there, you remember other rooms. Room 118, where the headboard clicked against the wall with every breath. Room 312, where the spring sounded like someone trying to learn the violin. Room 406, where you fell asleep during a test and dreamt that Queen Victoria invited you to nap forever in a palace made of quilts. That one needed no changes. But room 204, it's close. Very close. Still you make notes. The right pillow is just a little stiff. The blanket pulls too tight near the feet. Guests of a taller persuasion might wake up grumpy. You suggest a 15-degree clockwise rotation of the mattress. You recommend airing the room for 15 minutes between guests. You mark the corner of the sheet that's beginning to fray. Bed testing as a profession lived in the shadows of the service world. You weren't listed on the roster beside the porter, the maid, the cook, but the hotel manager knew your value. A guest who sleeps well doesn't complain at breakfast. A guest who tosses and turns begins to ask questions no one wants to answer. Historians still debate whether this role was officially salaried or simply assigned to the most trusted and quietest member of staff. But in the higher-end hotels of England's railway age, it was known if the bed felt like a cloud, someone had been paid to make it so. Sometimes you test more than one bed per day. Your muscles memorize the firmness, your shoulders become barometers. You wake up knowing whether a mattress prefers the east wall or the one by the fire. You become not just a tester, but an interpreter of rest. And of course there are hazards. Once you rolled too far and woke up on the floor wrapped in the bedsheet like a sad Victorian burrito. Another time you lay back on a prototype mattress that hadn't been finished, springs exposed, and spent the next 2 days walking with the posture of a man who had recently been in a duel and lost. Badly. Still you return. Because it's quiet. Because it matters. Because you are good at what you do. You never ask for recognition. No one applauds your exit. You leave the room exactly as you found it. You fluff the pillows, smooth the coverlet, tuck the note beneath the chambermaid's log. Then you close the door softly behind you so the mattress can rest too. So tonight, as you lower yourself onto your own bed, perhaps not feather-stuffed, perhaps not perfectly, even let your body settle. Picture the quiet room, the faint breeze, the way the mattress held you like it remembered you. Remember how still the world felt when you lay there doing nothing, and doing everything. You didn't just test the bed. You made sleep possible for someone else. And maybe you earned your own. The corridors of the hotel fade behind you, one polished tile and velvet curtain at a time. Your coat swings gently over your shoulder. The last traces of the mattress you tested still linger in your muscles. Your back, recalling where it sagged just slightly near the centre, your shoulders remembering the faint spring creak that only happened when turning right. But the night isn't over. In fact, this part of your evening is almost a tradition now, not an obligation, more like a ceremony. Because after a day of silent stillness and soft mechanical hums, there's still one more quiet role to play. It isn't listed in any newspaper nor announced on any programme. It doesn't require an audience-only presence. You're a parlour pianist, not a performer, not a virtuoso. You're not on stage or standing beneath chandeliers bathing in applause. Your hands do not chase acclaim. They simply create space for others. This evening's appointment takes you to a fine Georgian townhouse on Brambleton Lane just off the edge of the town square. You've been here before, more times than you can count. The lady of the house sends a polite note by hand once every week or two. A small supper, quiet company, your presence and playing if convenient. You never say no. You arrive just after 8. The sky is an indigo wash above the gas lamps, and the autumn wind carries the scent of coal smoke rose water and someone's overambitious attempt at roasted parsnips. The door is opened by a familiar maid who nods once and leads you down the hall, past rooms lit with oil lamps and the quiet clinking of spoons. The drawing room is wide, thick-carpeted, heavy with velvet and quiet wealth. A fire crackles politely in the grate. Conversation hums in soft bursts from around a cluster of chairs arranged in the shape of a polite argument. You recognise most of the guests' faces you've never spoken to, but whose breathing and laughter you know by rhythm now. and at the far end of the room near the tall window sits the piano, an upright walnut casing polished to a soft sheen. The keys slightly uneven, the top one stubbornly mute unless coaxed just right. A single silver candle burns in a holder atop the lid, flickering as you approach like it's saying hello. You sit, adjust the stool and rest your hands lightly on the keys. The room doesn't hush. That's not what's supposed to happen. No one claps. No one turns. The host gives a small nod. You begin. A slow waltz, old but familiar one that settles into the corners of the room like an old coat draped over a chair. You don't play to be noticed. You play to be absorbed. Your job here is not performance, it's preservation. You maintain the mood, keep conversations from stalling, prevent awkward silences from turning into irreversible scandals. A well-timed diminuendo softens a political disagreement. A melodic bridge distracts from someone dropping a teacup. A subtle key change gives an exhausted mother just enough cover to cry into her handkerchief for a moment before smiling again. Sometimes when you're playing, you watch the room in reflections. The glass of the window shows silhouettes shifting and nodding. Shadows of stories passing behind you. You don't know what's being said, you just know how to match it. Historians rarely mention the retained pianists of the Victorian era, and when they do, it's in a single sentence. Music was provided, as if it came from nowhere, as if the sound simply willed itself into the room and played itself for polite society. But you know the truth. You are the one holding the tempo when the room wavers. You are the invisible hand smoothing the fabric of the evening. You are the pause between phrases, the backdrop to gossip, the heartbeat beneath a glance across the tea table, and you are always, always listening. You notice the woman in mauve lean forward just slightly when the music swells. You see the man in the corner start to tap his foot, then stop, then tap again when he thinks no one is watching. You hear the silence grow between two sisters, seated too far apart to ignore one another, but too proud to move. You switch to a mazurka, just lively enough, just difficult enough to require concentration. Your fingers move with practiced grace, not showy, not stiff. You've long stopped thinking about the notes. They are muscle memory now. What you think about instead are the rhythms in the room. The click of a watch fob chain, the scrape of a pastry fork, the sigh a guest doesn't mean to let slip. Once you played through an entire dinner while a man was proposing marriage 3 feet behind you. You didn't hear the words, but the music told you everything. The hesitation before the final chord, the breath held, the slight delay before the kiss or perhaps the rejection. You never turned around. Your position is unspoken but known. You're paid at the end of the evening discreetly, always discreetly, with a folded note or a pressed coin. Sometimes there's no payment at all, just a plate of biscuits wrapped in linen and a promise to write again soon. You never argue, because the music is part of you now, and playing even without recognition feels like breathing with your hands. As the evening winds down, you transition into something slow, something so soft the flames seem to lean toward it. The conversations falter, the room exhales. You hold the final note just long enough that no one notices when you stop. You close the lid, stand, nod once. No one claps, but several glance your way, grateful and quiet. You collect your gloves, your hat, and your breath. Outside, the wind has shifted. The streets are emptier now, your steps echoing just slightly as you walk toward home. The night air bites gently at your ears. You hum as you go, not the tune you played, but something you've carried since childhood. A melody no one knows but you. So tonight as your head sinks into the pillow, let your thoughts drift like soft notes in a warm room. Picture the piano, its keys glowing faintly in candlelight, the way your fingers moved without urgency, the way the music swirled in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. You weren't there to be seen. You were there to hold everything together without saying a word, and you did. The streets are quieter now, not empty but still softened. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask questions, that accepts your presence without remark. A lamplighter clinks his way up the avenue behind you, murmuring to himself and casting small pools of amber into the damp grey. Shop shutters have closed. Newspaper boys are gone. Even the dogs seem to be speaking in whispers. You take a turn off the main road and walk beneath a wrought iron archway into the familiar courtyard of the British Museum. It doesn't look like much from the rear entrance, just a heavy oak door and a small window with a single candle burning within. But beyond it lies your world. You're a copyist, not a scholar, not an author. A copyist. You do not argue over translations or fight for publication. You do not give lectures or sit on panels. Your job is to sit in silence and copy line by line, word by word, something that someone else wrote centuries ago. And in doing so, you preserve it. Not in theory, in ink. This morning, like every morning, you arrive just before the chiming of the 6 a.m. bell from the chapel down the lane. You unlock the door with a brass key worn smooth by years of handling. Inside, the air is cooler than outside, which feels improbable in late autumn, and yet somehow is always true. The scriptorium, or at least that's what the curator insists on calling it, is long and narrow, lined with shelves and cases and stacks of brown boxes bound in twine. Some are labelled in neat copperplate script. Others bear smudges and dates, and the occasional cryptic symbol that may have meant something once, but now just looks like a smudge trying to make a point. Your desk is at the far end. It's plain but sturdy, stained with ink rings and wax drips, its surface gently bowed by time. You lay your things down, coat gloves, a small tin of tea leaves you keep tucked inside a velvet bag, and then you sit. Your tools await you. A quill trimmed and sharpened, a bottle of iron gall ink, thick and brown black, a fresh sheet of rag paper, crisp and faintly textured, a small square of blotting parchment, a candle stub, and at the centre of it all today's subject, a folio from the late 1400s, copied once in the Low Countries, its binding brittle, its Latin dense. You breathe in and begin. Letter by letter you let your hand move. Your fingers are steady from years of this. You've trained yourself not only to replicate script, but to enter it, to become it. You match the loop of the lowercase g, the height of the h, the gentle tilt of the a. You replicate flourishes even when they feel unnecessary. Because the point is not expression, it is faithfulness. This particular text is on herbal remedies, recipes and musings and half-superstitions passed down from one generation of apothecaries to the next. You don't judge, you transcribe. To remove melancholy vapours from the brain, steep violets in vinegar and inhale before dawn. You copy it straight-faced. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. That's not for you to say. Historians still debate what role copyists like you played. Some say you were little more than glorified scribes' cogs in the great machine of archival preservation. Others say you were artists in your own right, curators of the physicality of memory, gatekeepers of handwriting and texture and ink. But you don't spend time thinking about that. You're too busy watching the tail of a medieval S-curve into the margin. Some days you copy text in Latin, others in Middle English. Once you spent 3 weeks copying a single travel diary of a merchant from Norwich who claimed to have met a two-headed goat in Sicily. You copied every word, every sketch, every embellishment. The goat wore a ribbon. You didn't ask. You're not allowed to alter the text, but you are allowed to notate. So when a word is illegible, you write obscured. When ink has faded to nothing, you write void. When a wormhole has eaten through a sentence, you sigh and write around it. You learn to read the shadows of letters, to feel out a meaning not through logic but instinct. The room is quiet. Sometimes you hear distant voices from the museum halls, a custodian sweeping, a cart rolling, but mostly it's just you. The scratch of the nib, the faint drip of wax, the occasional stretch of your neck. Lunch is plain, bread, cheese, tea if the kettle isn't occupied by someone boiling cabbage in the staff kitchen. You eat at your desk, carefully shifting your papers aside so no crumbs touch the parchment. The rules are strict. Ink must be kept on the right. Candle must be watched. Coffee is forbidden. And absolutely, absolutely no sneezing near vellum. You've been here long enough to see others come and go. Interns, scholars, visiting professors with opinions on everything and understanding of very little. Some last a week, some a day, you years. because you know this isn't glamorous work, but it's important. You once spent 5 days copying a page that no one had read in 300 years. When you asked the archivist if anyone was likely to read it now, she shrugged and said, "No, but now they could." And that's the thing. You don't copy for fame or applause. You copy because someone must, because ink fades, because paper tears, because time, if left alone, erases, and so you fight back, not with speeches, with a quill. By late afternoon your hand is sore, your spine protests, but you've nearly finished the page. A small diagram of a flower crudely drawn sits in the margin. You replicate it with care, the petals uneven, the leaves mismatched. You copy the imperfection exactly, because the person who drew it thought it mattered, and that to you is reason enough. When you finally set the pen down, the page shines gently in the waning light. It's not perfect. You smudged one R and the ink blotted slightly near the bottom edge, but it is honest. It is faithful. It is done. You place it gently in the drying rack. Wipe your tools. Pack away the ink. You step outside just as the bell in the tower strikes 5. The city exhales. Streets stir. Someone is playing a violin 3 houses down. The air smells of coal and bread. And you walk home with your hands ink-stained and your soul quietly full. Because today something old lived again. And you quiet, unnoticed, uncelebrated, you made sure of it. So tonight, as your head rests against the pillow and the dreams begin to blur at the edges, think of that page. The careful loops. The margins that carry whispers. The way a single candle lit a path between centuries. You didn't just write. You remembered. And you made sure no one would forget. The streets are wrapped in hush now, as if the city has finally drawn a curtain across the day. Even the gas lamps burn with less urgency. You walk slowly each step, a quiet farewell to the day's bustle. But you're not heading home just yet. There's one more stop, one more person, one more room, one more role to step into quiet, steady, precise. You're a gentleman's valet, but not just any valet. You're the personal valet to Sir Henry Wellstone, minor aristocrat, major creature of habit. And your job, if one could call it that, is to oversee the maintenance of a life lived at the absolute slowest setting. Sir Henry is not a difficult man, nor is he a demanding one. In fact, he does very little that requires your assistance at all, and yet, somehow, your services are considered essential, because even a man who does nothing must do it with the proper trousers, press the correct chair warmed, and the precise angle of the fire arranged to suit his reading, whether or not he ever opens the book. Your day begins at 7 a.m, though Sir Henry rarely rises before 9. You unlock the back door of the townhouse, hang your coat by the scullery, and step softly up the narrow stairs to the master's floor. You lay out the same garments each morning, tweed trousers, a cardigan, a choice between 3 nearly identical waistcoats. The brown one with brass buttons, the brown one with wooden buttons, or the brown one with slightly darker brown buttons. He never comments. You rotate them anyway, not for variety, but to keep the illusion of it alive. You fill the shaving basin, light the coal grate, shake out the newspaper, fold it neatly on the table, always with the obituaries on top, Sir Henry insists. He once said, "Better to know who's left before you get to what's coming." You've since learned not to put the headlines first. You also prepare his slippers. One time years ago you forgot. He padded about in his stockings for 3 hours before finally sighing and remarking, "I feel improperly grounded." The slippers have never been missed again. When Sir Henry finally rises, you greet him with a nod, no words. He grunts. You pour the tea, not hot, not cold, tepid like his interest in conversation. 1 sugar, no lemon. You made that mistake once, never again. His breakfast is simple, soft-boiled egg toast cut diagonally marmalade on a saucer, not the plate. The toast must be arranged at an angle crust outward. You don't know why. He's never said. But you suspect that some minor domestic trauma once involved misaligned toast. After breakfast he reads, or appears to. His reading chair is beside the window, but he rarely turns a page. You dust the study while he contemplates the weather. You fluff the same 3 cushions he never uses. You realign the same painting above the mantel that's never actually crooked. These are not duties, really. They're rituals, tiny acts of order in a life that has chosen to avoid all forms of haste. At 11 a.m, you polish his boots even though he hasn't walked further than the garden in weeks. The act matters more than the outcome. The polish must be applied in soft circles, buffed until they gleam, and returned precisely to their stand beneath the window, left a boot slightly forward. If they are not angled correctly, he will pause before sitting and stare at them until you notice. Your day is filled with these kinds of silences, not cold, not resentful, simply quiet. You know each room in this house by the sound it makes. The study floorboards sigh when the weather turns damp. The upstairs hallway creaks in one precise spot 4 steps before the linen cupboard. The tea cart squeaks if you wheel it too fast, which is to say at any pace faster than a funeral procession. At 3 p.m. each day, Sir Henry takes his walk. This is your most active duty. You help him into his overcoat. You place the cane in his right hand. You open the front door. Together, you walk the full circumference of the square once clockwise, never counterclockwise. He tried it once and claimed it made him feel tilted for the remainder of the week. He pauses by the iron statue in the centre of the square Lord someone or other, rearing dramatically on a horse. Sir Henry always glances up, never speaks, then walks on. Next, he pauses at the northeast hedge. No one knows why. There is nothing remarkable about the hedge, but he observes it, nods faintly, and then continues the walk home. You remove his coat, hang the cane, prepare the tea. If it is raining, the walk is cancelled. Not postponed, cancelled. The routine is sacred. There is no flexibility. Afternoons are for correspondence. You bring pen and ink paper and blotter. Sir Henry writes perhaps a line, perhaps 2, then stops. More often, he simply stares at the page. Eventually you collect the paper unmarked and return the ink. Nothing is said. But the process must take place or the day feels incomplete. Dinner is at 7. You do not prepare it. There's a cook for that, but you set the table. 1 fork, 1 knife, 1 folded napkin. Water poured not from the jug on the table, but from the identical jug resting in the pantry. The difference is invisible, but he would know. After dinner you light the drawing room fire. He reads again without turning pages. You tidy the sideboard. You wipe down the decanter, though it is rarely touched. You replace the biscuits he never eats, and when the clock chimes 9, he retires. You help him out of his waistcoat, fold it, hang the trousers, brush down the coat, arrange the nightshirt on the bed. Then, as always, you check the barometer. He doesn't ask you to, he never mentions the weather. But if you forget, he will cough pointedly and glance at the wall. You never forget anymore. Your duties are not hard, but they are exact. Your days are not busy, but they are full. You're not a servant in the dramatic sense, rushing, clattering, answering bells. You're a steward of quiet, a protector of routine, a guardian of one man's small, deliberate life. Historians rarely write about men like Sir Henry, and they almost never write about the valets who served them. But that doesn't mean you haven't built something meaningful, because there is a grace in repetition, a dignity in care, and someone must bear witness to the quiet lives, the ones lived without great events, the ones measured not in headlines but in tea temperatures and precisely folded socks. So tonight, as you turn down your own bed and fold your day into silence, imagine that drawing room again. The fire flickering low, the boots aligned, the book unopened but waiting, and you steady unnoticed but always there. You didn't chase glory. You served order. And in a world full of noise that is no small thing, by now most of the town has surrendered to sleep. Chimneys sigh into the dark. The clatter of boots has ceased. Gas lamps glow quietly behind glass like thoughts someone forgot to finish. But your night isn't over. Not yet. You walk past the boundary of houses and into the garden edge of the estate toward a low building that always smells of leaves and warmth and something almost sweet. You are a silkworm tender. A job so small, so quiet, and so absurdly soft that most people forget it exists. and yet every thread of silk that ever wrapped itself around a nobleman's wrist, every ribbon that brushed a duchess's throat began in a room just like this. With you, with worms, with patience. You unlatch the wooden door. The hinges creak gently like an old man stretching in the morning. A pocket of warm, moist air escapes and wraps around your face heavy with damp straw mulberry and something fainter. Life. Living silk. You step inside and close the door behind you. The room is dim save for a lantern you've hung near the trays. Rows and rows of wooden slats stretch from wall to wall, stacked in neat layers like sleeping quarters for very small monks. And on those trays, silkworms. Hundreds of them. White, plump, silent. At first glance, they don't seem to be doing anything, but look closer and you'll see the slow rhythm of chewing, of shifting, of becoming. You remove your gloves, not because the work is messy, but because it is sacred. The first task is always feeding. You unwrap the bundle of mulberry leaves you cut fresh that morning. They're still slightly cool from the night air, their edges curled inward like sleeping hands. You run your fingers over them, gently checking for insect spots, signs of dryness. Only perfect leaves make it into the trays. You sprinkle them across the silkworm beds, in a thin layer moving slowly, deliberately, so as not to disturb the worms that have already begun their spin. You hear it then, the sound that keeps you here. A soft whispering rustle like rain falling on parchment. Hundreds of mouths chewing in perfect quiet unison. It is, you think, the most soothing sound in the world. You move tray to tray, breathing in the green of the leaves, the musk of silk oil, the faint dust of the room. The worms never thank you, but they eat, and that is enough. You learned long ago that silkworms are fragile. A sudden chill can ruin them. A bad leaf can sicken dozens. If the room becomes too dry, their silk snaps. Too damp and mould creeps in. Your job isn't just to feed them. It's to listen. To feel. You check the stove in the corner, still glowing low. You open the vent just a notch to let the air circulate. You've lined the windows with cloth to keep drafts out. You've even stuffed lavender in the corners, not because it helps, but because you like the way it smells when the nights get long. Once a week you clean the trays. Today is not that day. Tonight it's about watching, about waiting. You lean down to examine a cocoon in progress. The worm inside has curled in on itself, its head weaving in a slow, steady rhythm. Around and around, like the hand of a clock that no longer cares what time it is. The silk glistens slightly, catching the lantern light. You could almost forget how fine it is, each cocoon a mile of thread if you unravelled it right. Historians rarely write about you. They write about the silk, the trade, the dresses, the wealth. But none of it would exist without you standing in a humid shed in the dark arranging leaves on a wooden tray, while tiny, tireless creatures turn plant matter into gold. You don't need recognition. But sometimes, when the silence deepens and the worms spin on in their secret labour, you feel a kind of pride that runs deeper than applause. You are not a weaver, you are not a merchant, but you are the one who begins the story. The worms are almost ready for their next stage. You watch for the signs, slower movement, less feeding, a faint yellowing of their translucent skin. When the time comes, you'll transfer them to spinning racks, small bundles of twigs or paper coils, where they can form their cocoons undisturbed. For now, you wait. You sit on the stool by the fire, sip your tea bitter and dark. You close your eyes for a moment and let the soft, rhythmic chewing lull your thoughts. You remember your first season here, how clumsy your fingers felt, how you feared crushing one of them, how you stared in disbelief the first time a cocoon emerged white, perfect, impossibly light. You held it like a jewel. A treasure that came not from force, but from quiet, endless care. You've since tended thousands. Some nights you dream of them, tiny movements in the dark, threads trailing from your hands, spinning themselves into scarves across your arms. You never fight those dreams. They are gentle, like the work. Some people think the job must be dull, that you stand for hours doing nothing. But you know the truth, your hands are never idle. Your mind is always listening. You're adjusting, noticing, waiting. The worms may be small, but their needs are constant. And if you meet them, if you watch the temperature, the moisture, the mood, then they reward you. Not with thanks, not with noise, but with silk. It takes about 10 days for the full spin. You'll be here every night feeding, tending, watching. And when the cocoons are ready, you'll collect them carefully one by one and lay them in baskets. They'll be taken to the boiling room after that. You try not to think about that part too much. It's not cruel, not really. It's just part of the process. Still, sometimes you set one cocoon aside, not for harvest, just to keep, to hold. You press it between your palms and imagine the worm still sleeping inside, unaware of its thread, its purpose, its transformation. You tell yourself it's for observation, for quality control, but it's really for wonder. You finish the round. The last tray is quiet. All the worms are still now deep into their spin. The sound of chewing has faded. The room feels hushed, almost reverent. You dim the lantern, close the stove vent, lay your palm against the door before opening it just to feel the warmth one last time. Then you step outside. The air is cool and sharp. Your breath curls into the night like smoke. You stand for a moment letting the scent of mulberry and silk cling to your sleeves. Then you walk back across the lawn, boots soft against the frost. So tonight when you pull the covers up around your shoulders, imagine the quiet shed, the warm air, the whisper of 100 tiny jaws turning leaves into thread, and your hands steady, gentle, faithful, giving them what they need. You didn't force beauty. You grew it, one leaf at a time. Morning arrives not with a trumpet, but with a sigh. Beyond the walls, the village begins its slow, deliberate wakefulness. Roosters crowing somewhere too far to be annoying. Milk carts rumbling along cobbled lanes and boots striking cold stone with the sort of rhythm that only someone half awake can manage. But here inside the laundry house, your world is already warm, fragrant and hissing. You are a flatwork ironer, a quiet professional in one of the least appreciated, most essential corners of Victorian domestic life. You don't clean the clothes, you don't scrub the stains, you don't bleach or starch or hang lines of linen across windy gardens. Your job comes after all that. Your job is to make cloth obey. You arrive before sunrise, you like it that way. The laundry house is yours in the early hours, filled with steam and silence. The floor is always just slightly damp from yesterday's rinsing, the windows fogged over like breath on glass. The scent is unmistakable, soap ash, starch and cotton. Clean, honest smells. You hang your coat on the peg by the stove, roll your sleeves and tie your apron tight. Everything in here has a purpose. The pine folding table smoothed by generations. The thick cloth cover stretched taut across its top. The pressing cloths stacked neatly on the shelf. The iron a dense black slab of cast metal still warm from the overnight fire beneath the stove. You don't just use one iron. You use a rotation, at least 2, sometimes 3. While one is heating on the stove, another is in your hand and a third is cooling in reserve. You move between them like a slow dance partner, never rushing, always knowing which one is ready. The worst thing a flatwork ironer can do is hesitate. Today's work is stacked on the oak stool by the stove, a heap of fresh damp linens. Tablecloths, napkins, a few petticoats, and at least one set of sheets for the guest bedroom upstairs. The fabric is cool and pliable, still heavy with water, soft to the touch. You start with a napkin, white square crisp. You snap it gently to shake out the creases, then lay it flat on the table. The grain of the fabric tells you which direction to press. The weave is fine, higher quality than most. You position your pressing cloth, lift the iron with both hands, and begin. The first pass is always the most satisfying. The weight of the iron presses heat and intention into the fold. The hiss of steam rises as moisture meets iron. A wrinkle disappears beneath your hand like a ripple sucked flat on a still pond. You move slowly, deliberately from one edge to the next. Not fast, never fast. This is a job of control, not speed. Historians rarely mention ironers. They write about laundresses, kitchen maids, governesses, but they forget about the people who made everything look finished. No dinner party ever succeeded without a pressed tablecloth. No bedchamber ever felt truly grand without perfectly folded linens. You are the last touch before presentation, and you take pride in that. Your hands move with quiet certainty. You fold the napkin, square its corners, and place it at the top of the stack. Next, a petticoat. Delicate. Ruffled. You smooth the lace with the side of your hand and dab it with a cloth before applying heat. You don't use full pressure on lace. It requires a lighter hand. You once scorched a hem early in your training. You still remember the smell, the hiss, the look on your supervisor's face. You've never made that mistake again. By mid-morning, you've settled into rhythm. Lift, press, smooth, fold, lift, press, smooth, fold. You don't need a clock to measure time. You measure it in linens, in piles, in steam. You pause to drink tea, strong black, no sugar. Sweetness has no place here. Your hands are already stiffening. You stretch your fingers, rotate your wrist. The weight of the iron is unforgiving, but your muscles have adapted. Your right arm is stronger than your left now. Your grip has become like rope. Still, you know when to rest. You clean the irons with salt if they begin to catch. You watch for signs of soot. You run a slice of lemon over the base if it starts to dull. Your tools are your pride. Dull ironwork leaves dull cloth. You ironed the master's dinner napkins last week for an evening party. 10 of them, all identical, white, starched, folded to precise dimensions. You overheard one of the guests say crisp as morning frost. That was enough. You didn't need your name mentioned. You never need it. This work is anonymous, and that's its secret strength. You learn to read cloth. You know when it was poorly woven, when it was washed too harshly, when someone folded it incorrectly and it formed a permanent crease. You fix what you can. You forgive what you can't. Once a maid tried to help by pre-folding a set of drawer cloths. They came to you already wrinkled. You said nothing, ironed them again, then refolded them properly. The next time they arrived flat. She learned. Quietly. The way you did. You're not just smoothing fabric. You're restoring dignity, precision, cleanliness, order. And in a world where the rich live above and the workers move below, that order is something worth defending. After the linens are pressed, you fold them on the wooden bench beside the window. You stack them not just by size, but by type. Cotton with cotton, lace separate, no corners askew. If something droops, you refold it. The stack must look as smooth as the work itself. A maid collects the pile without a word. She knows better than to rush you. You've ironed through rainstorms, through blizzards, through weeks where the boiler didn't work and you had to heat your irons over the kitchen fire. You've burned your wrist on metal, scalded your fingers on steam, and yet never once considered quitting, because the cloth comes back to you. Always. Wrinkled, stubborn, waiting, and you press it smooth again, without question, without complaint. Your hands don't just hold the iron, they hold the rhythm of the house. So tonight, when your arms ache and the world has gone soft with sleep, imagine that long pine table, the hiss of steam, the glow of iron, the slow, perfect flattening of the world one fold at a time. You didn't change the world, but you made it look like someone cared, and that is more than enough. The world outside is slipping quietly into rest. Horses are stabled, lamps have been trimmed, shutters pulled in tight. It is the hour when the city forgets itself, when even the wind begins to whisper rather than push. And as most souls drift into the hush of sleep, you arrive for your shift. Not into a factory, nor a ballroom, nor even a study, but into a small, dim room at the rear of a solicitor's office. A room where the walls smell faintly of wax and parchment, where the windows are always closed to keep out the soot, where time has long stopped ticking, but words keep walking forward one careful step at a time. You are a letter copyist. More precisely, you are a professional transcriber of correspondence and documents, legal, personal, bureaucratic, and everything in between. Not the kind of work that draws praise or titles, but the kind that preserves things, the kind that ensures a sentence said in haste becomes a legacy held in ink. Your work begins not with a pen, but with stillness. You hang your coat by the door, light a small oil lamp, trim the wick to just the right height, bright enough to see, soft enough not to glare. The desk in front of you is narrow but solid. Its surface bears the gentle grooves of years spent cradling wrists, and the smell of ink never quite leaves it even after scrubbing. The stack tonight is bundled in faded twine 17 documents, some already fading, some with blots, some so hastily scrawled you'll have to squint and guess at half the words. But that's the job. That's why you're here. You untie the bundle, smooth the first page, dip your pen, and begin, to whom it may concern. The first strokes are always deliberate. You let your hand warm into the motion like a violinist tuning their strings. The pen glides, then resists, then finds its rhythm. Your wrist moves with a confidence born not of creativity but of precision. This work is not about invention. It's about trust. You are trusted to carry words from one state of being into another, from chaos into clarity, from personal to public, from hand to history. Every quirk of the original letter must be honoured. Spacing, spelling, capitalization. If the writer dotted their I with an accidental smudge, you echo that smudge not in ink but in spirit. Because the point is not to improve, the point is to preserve. You shift to the next line. My dear sister, I regret I cannot attend the ceremony. Your hand falters for half a second. Not for lack of comprehension, but because the emotion, though not yours, brushes against you all the same. You steady yourself. Continue. The room is silent, save for the occasional pop from the fireplace and the faint scratching of pen on paper. You do not speak, you do not hum. Every breath is measured so your hand stays still. Even the tea beside you has gone cold, but you don't mind. This is where you do your best thinking. You remember your first assignment, a property deed from an estate in Kent. 3 pages of repetitive clauses and legal redundancies. You copied it so carefully your hand cramped by page 2. But the solicitor praised your steadiness. That was years ago. Now your hand rarely cramps. Your letters flow without thought. But your mind always listening. Some documents carry weight. You can feel it before you even read the words. A will, a confession, a letter from a dying father to a son he hasn't seen in 30 years. You've copied all of them, never once adding judgment, only ink. Historians rarely mention people like you. They mention the writer, the recipient, maybe even the lawyer who processed the paper. But they forget the hand that made sure the words could endure, that the meanings weren't swallowed by bad grammar, poor spelling, or the unforgiving brittleness of aging parchment. You've saved words that would have otherwise disappeared. You've carried voices across decades. There's something almost holy about it. Tonight's batch includes a military dispatch, a request for payment, a petition from a widow, each one written in a different hand, a different tone. You mimic each style, not their handwriting, of course, but the structure, the spacing, the rhythm. You once copied a letter from a sailor who had scrawled a farewell on the back of a biscuit wrapper. The original reeked of salt and rum. The ink bled, but you preserved every line, even the smear where his thumb had dragged across a tear. Not all letters are dramatic, some are mundane. Sir enclosed are £2, 4 shillings for the delivery of coal. You copy those with the same care, because behind every bland transaction is a story you'll never fully see. You take a moment to rest your hand, flex your fingers, sip your tea now, lukewarm and bitter. The lamplight flickers. A breeze touches the window pane but doesn't enter. You tuck your scarf a little tighter around your neck and return to the desk. There's something satisfying about a completed page. The paper warm from your hand, the lines perfectly straight, the ink still glistening. You blot it gently with powder, set it aside, begin again. You don't rush. Rushing leads to errors, a missed word, a transposed digit, a signature left half-formed. You once saw a copied name spelled incorrectly, and the document had to be redone signed again by a man who had since passed. That error cost a family 4 months of court delays. You never made that mistake. You never will. Your pen continues to move. You lose track of time, not because you're tired, but because the work doesn't rely on the clock. It relies on attention, on immersion. There's a deep calm that comes from being needed silently, from doing something no one notices when done right, but that breaks everything if done wrong. You are not the voice, you're the echo that ensures it's heard. So tonight when you lie in bed, and your hand still twitches from invisible ink lines, let yourself remember the pages, the stories, the names, the silence filled not with emptiness but with care. You didn't author history, but you gave it shape and made sure it wouldn't fade. The fire in the hearth crackles low, smoke curls into the rafters and fades. Outside the moon hangs pale and indifferent over the rooftops, casting soft silver shadows across the yard. Even the dogs have gone still. The world feels suspended, caught between one breath and the next. But inside the barn at the edge of the property, your day is just beginning. You're a feather sorter, not a seamstress, not a tailor, not a maker of hats or gowns or fans. You never see the final flourish, the bow atop the bonnet, the trim of a collar. What you handle comes before all of that. Before fabric, before form, you handle feathers, and your job is to sort them by size, by texture, by colour, by purpose. Tonight's delivery waits for you in an old wooden crate tucked into the corner of the barn, still smelling faintly of straw and sea salt. The feathers have come by boat packed in burlap sacks and now spill onto the sorting table in a heap of grey-brown, cream and black. Duck, goose, pheasant, swan, even the occasional peacock, its blue still iridescent in the lamplight. You roll up your sleeves, tie your apron and begin. The work is silent. Each feather is lifted gently, turned in your hands, examined under the flickering light. You feel along the spine. Is it stiff or supple, smooth or ragged? Does the vein lie flat or are the barbs tangled? You sort them into trays, long flight feathers here, soft down there. You set aside the damaged ones. You fluff the others gently with your fingers, separating the clumps where salt water or age has compressed them. You work without gloves. You need to feel the texture. The air grows soft with floating strands. You sneeze, once turn away, then continue. Feather sorting is not a glamorous trade, but it's essential to an entire world of Victorian luxury. The fan in a lady's hand, the plume on a cavalry officer's helmet, the filling of a high-end mattress, the trim on a stage actor's cape. All of it begins here with raw feathers with eyes that know the difference between functional and ornamental. You didn't train in a school. You were taught by another sorter, an older woman with hands like parchment and a gaze that could size a quill at 20 paces. She taught you the difference between wing and tail, between plume and fluff, between display and comfort. A feather has a destiny, she used to say. You just have to see it. You took that to heart. Now, after years of practice, you sort instinctively. Your hands barely pause. This one will be used in writing quills. That one too soft but ideal for a pillow. The next long, curved, elegant, surely meant for a fan handle in some Mayfair salon. Some feathers are still sticky with oil. Others have tiny flecks of blood. You clean them gently with a damp cloth. There's no glamour here, but there's dignity. You're the link between nature and ornament. Historians never write about people like you. They write about milliners, dressmakers, glove designers. But none of their creations would be possible without your hands first making sense of the chaos. Sorting what's usable from what's not. What's beautiful from what's functional. The barn is quiet. Just you, the table, the smell of old wood and the whisper of feathers brushing against one another. You find comfort in the repetition. Lift, inspect, sort, stack. Some feathers make you pause. There's a downy plume so soft it nearly melts in your hand. You stroke it across your cheek. It feels like silence. You place it gently in the bedding tray. A set of flight feathers, stiff and sharp, dark with a green-black sheen, strong. You angle them into the military tray. These will be cut, lacquered and mounted to helmets, worn by men who have never once touched a goose in their lives. Then a burst of blue. A peacock feather its eye, vivid and intact. It's beautiful. A little ragged but salvageable. You smooth it gently. It catches the light like fire. You set it aside, not in a tray but on a separate cloth. You always keep the best for last. Your fingers grow stiff after hours of sorting. You pause, stretch, sip from a mug of cooled tea. The dust has settled on your clothes. Your apron is dusted in fluff. The floor beneath you is a halo of scattered barbs and shafts. You'll sweep it all later. Once you found a bird bone wrapped in the feathers. Just a tiny one, hollow, sharp at one end. You kept it in your drawer for weeks before finally burying it beneath the mulberry tree. Not because it was useful, but because it felt like something that needed care. You're not sentimental, but you are careful. That's the difference between a sorter and a labourer. A labourer moves the material. A sorter listens to it. You run your hands over the final tray. Dozens of down feathers, clean uniform ready. You tie them into bundles with twine. Each bundle weighs the same. You stack them neatly in the basket for delivery. You write a note for the head seamstress, best bundle on top lighting uniform. You don't sign it. She'll know it's you. It's nearly morning now. The sky has begun to change. Not light yet, but less dark. You blow out the lamp, stretch your arms, and brush the loose feathers from your sleeves. So tonight, as your head sinks into your own pillow, perhaps when you filled yourself, imagine the table, the tray, the quiet hush of soft things becoming order. Imagine your hands gently finding place and purpose where others only see mess. You didn't make the feathers, but you gave them meaning. You've spent the day among feathers and fire, among iron and ink, among lives not your own. And yet, as you walk now beneath the first breath of morning boots whispering along the frost-tipped road, you're on your way to one final duty. A job so minor, so quiet, so easily forgotten that most people never notice it was done at all until the moment it isn't. You are a lamplighter, the last of your kind in this neighbourhood perhaps, and the first one up always. You carry your tools in a simple satchel, a small torch, a long brass hook, a flint, a rag. You wear thick gloves not for show, but to guard against frost and rust, and the sometimes bitter metal of the pole. Your boots are waxed, your scarf is doubled, and you walk the same route each day, same steps, same turns, same pauses, same reach upward. Your territory begins at Church Street and winds along 12 blocks to the far end of Barton Lane, where the last lamp stands crooked like a tired old man who's seen too many nights. 56 lamps in total, each one mounted atop a black iron post 6 feet high, its glass clouded with time and coal smoke. The job is simple: light them at dusk, extinguish them at dawn. But the simplicity is deceptive. Tonight you begin as always at lamp 1 beneath the large chestnut tree. You stop, set your bag on the ground, remove your pole, reach upward. The hook slides easily under the latch. You lift it. The small glass door swings open with a familiar creak. You strike the flint once, twice. A spark, a flicker, a brief blue flame, then yellow. The gas hisses into life. You adjust the valve slightly. Not too high, there's a draft tonight. You close the door, 1 down, 55 to go. You move steadily, not rushed. The route is muscle memory now. Your body turns corners before your thoughts do. The lamps respond to your touch like old friends, some eager, some stubborn, all familiar. You know which ones take 2 strikes instead of 1, which latches stick in the frost, which posts lean just a little and must be approached from the right. By the 5th lamp, your fingers have begun to go numb. By the 10th, you no longer notice. You once counted how many steps it takes to walk the entire route. 1,472, give or take a few depending on the mud. The silence of early morning is different from the silence of night. Night carries possibility, laughter, argument, song. Morning carries only breath. It is the sound of things waiting to begin again. You pass by the baker's window where light is just beginning to glow. A warm scent follows you for half a block, dough, yeast, cinnamon. You nod to the cat perched on the sill. She blinks at you unimpressed. At lamp 16 you pause longer. It's the one that was knocked sideways last winter by a runaway carriage. The repairman claimed he'd fixed it, but you still check it every day, just to be sure. At lamp 23 you spot something wedged in the glass, a bird's feather. You remove it gently, pocket it. You don't know why. You've kept a small collection of oddities found in lamps over the years. Feathers, buttons, a wax seal, a tiny ribbon. None of them matter, but you remember where each one came from. Historians rarely mention lamplighters. They record inventions, the gas valves, the lamps themselves, the engineers who designed them. But they forget the human hands that made those inventions useful. Without you, the streets would sleep in darkness. Without you, midnight would belong to shadows and broken ankles. You do not bring light, but you allow it to return. You once missed a lamp. Just one. You'd been ill. Another boy filled in skipped it by accident. A woman fell on the ice. Broke her arm. That night you walked the route twice. Since then, never again. Lamp 34 is always your favourite. It stands near the schoolhouse under a tall elm. At this hour, no children shout. No teachers scold. Just the empty windows and the faint sound of birds beginning to stir. You often pause here, just for a moment, to breathe, to let your back straighten and your arms rest. You think sometimes about what people see when they look out and see the lamp lit. Safety, perhaps, or routine, or nothing at all, but maybe that's the point. The work is meant to disappear, to fold back into the background, and yet without it, something would feel wrong. You reach the final stretch, 8 more to go. The light is rising now, soft and grey. You can see your breath less clearly. Your hands still move on instinct. You pass a window where a girl stands wrapped in a shawl watching you. She doesn't wave, but she sees you. You nod once. Continue on. At lamp 56 you pause. The crooked one. It leans slightly southward. Has done for years. It was meant to be fixed last spring. No one ever did. But you like it that way. It reminds you of yourself upright mostly. Still working, still warm inside. You light it. Close the door. Lower your pole. And the job is done. You turn. The street behind you now glows softly in 2 neat rows, 56 lamps. A path you made by hand. You walk home slowly. The bag is lighter now. The street fuller. Doors open. Curtains twitch. The baker carries out his first tray of loaves. So tonight when the lamps glow quietly against the dusk and someone walks home with their collar turned up, unaware of why the street feels safe, remember the hands that lit that path. Not seen, but always there. You didn't bring the sun, but you gave it time to rise. The sun is well past its highest point now. The lamps have all been extinguished. The midday bread is cooling on wooden boards. A draught slips under the servant's door and brushes against your ankles as you step into the mending room, tucked behind the laundry wing of the estate. You're not here to cook or wash or clean. You're here to repair what time has worn thin. You're a domestic garment mender. Not a dressmaker, not a tailor, not the kind of seamstress who cuts silk for balls or sews lace into wedding bodices. Your task is quieter, humble, invisible in the best way. You take what has been torn, snagged, worn down, and you make it whole again. The room you work in is small, not unpleasant. A narrow window lets in pale light. A table stands in the centre, scarred with needle pricks and hot wax rings. The shelves are lined with baskets of scraps sorted by texture, by weight, by colour. On the wall hangs a faded sketch of a needle threaded through a heart, not artistic, just human. You tie your apron roll up your sleeves and take your seat. The basket waiting for you today is full. That's no surprise. It always is on Monday. Inside, a footman's uniform jacket with a ripped inner seam. A housemaid's apron with a missing strap. 3 socks, none of them matching. A linen shirt belonging to the butler frayed at the collar and beginning to tear near the elbow. And a child's pinafore with a large pink stain across the front half, scrubbed away but still very much there. You begin with the jacket. The lining has split near the hem, likely from years of movement and strain. You thread your needle with black cotton, run the end through the beeswax and begin. The needle passes in and out rhythmic and certain. You don't think much about it now, your hands know what to do. They know the distance of a good stitch, the exact pressure to pull thread tight without puckering the fabric. They remember tension in the cloth. They read the warp and weft like a language. You mend quietly, steadily, letting the sounds around you become part of your pace. Outside the door, the kitchen staff are laughing at something. A door creaks, pots clatter, a dog barks twice then lies down. Inside, only the whisper of thread, the soft scrape of scissors. You're breathing calm and measured. You move next to the apron strap, a simple fix but one that will be noticed. A maid's apron is her armour. You reinforce the stitching, double back for strength. You don't just patch, you preserve. Historians rarely write about menders. They write about tailors, about designers, about royal commissions and extravagant wardrobes. But they forget that even the finest garments once worn begin to fall apart. And someone must be there when the seams split, when the fabric frays, when the proud cuff begins to droop. That someone is you, and your work, though unseen, is deeply felt. You pause only briefly before tackling the socks. These are your least favourite task, not because they're hard, but because they always make you sad. Socks wear out silently. No one notices until it's too late. A toe pokes through, a heel becomes thin, and suddenly a loyal companion to 100 steps becomes an embarrassment. You turn the first sock inside out. It's rough wool navy, patched once already. The hole is large. You position your darning mushroom inside and begin to weave new thread through the empty space over, under, until the gap disappears beneath your hands. Not good as new, but good enough to last. You always hope the wearer notices, that they pull it on one morning and say, "Well, now that's better." The pinafore comes last. It's small, soft, probably belongs to one of the governess's pupils. The fabric is cotton, worn thin but still strong. The stain looks like jam or maybe paint. You don't ask. Children find trouble faster than they find breakfast. You stitch a small patch in place, not white, but a pale rose-coloured square you found in your scrap box last week. It doesn't match, but it doesn't need to. It turns the stain into something cheerful. You smile just a little and imagine the child seeing it. Maybe she'll think her apron has been given a flower. Maybe she'll tell a story about it. You take no credit for the beauty, but you give it a place to begin. Sometimes you wish you could mend people as easily. The butler's furrowed brow, the housemaid's swollen knuckles, the child's silence after her father left in the carriage and didn't come back. But all you have is thread, so you use it. You remember once mending the same nightshirt 5 times over 2 years. It was patched at the sleeve, then the collar, then the shoulder, each stitch layered over the next like rings on a tree. It was never beautiful, but it was loved. And when it finally tore beyond saving the wearer, folded it himself, kissed the fabric and asked if he might keep it in a drawer. You said yes. Even worn things deserve peace. You fold the garments carefully as you finish each one. You stack them in the return basket. You brush away the loose threads from your lap. You stretch your fingers, flex your neck. Your back aches, but your spirit is light. You don't just fix tears, you extend lives. Each stitch says you're not done yet, and each patch says someone cared enough to keep you going. So tonight, as you pull your own blanket around your shoulders, think of the garments that passed through your hands, the hidden places made strong again, the weariness you turned into comfort. You didn't make new clothes, but you gave the old ones another chance, and that in this world is a quiet kind of grace. There's something deeply satisfying about finishing a day of mending. Your hands may ache and your eyes may blur from the strain of tiny stitches, but each thread you pass through cloth has added something permanent to the world, a small resistance against waste, a small act of care. But you aren't done yet. The sun is nearly gone now, sinking slowly behind slate roofs. Lamps have been lit again on the main road. The bakery shutters are drawn. The kitchen maids are cleaning up and someone is already hauling coal for the morning fire. Your boots crunch softly across gravel as you make your way back to the far side of the estate, past the carriage house and through a narrow side door. This part of the building is quiet, too quiet, some say. You're heading into the archive, because your next duty is not about cloth or coal or even light. It is about memory. You are a book duster, not a librarian, not a scholar, not a reader, even though you do read when no one is looking. You are the one who keeps the library from falling apart, not in knowledge but in presence. You keep the pages from curling the spines, from splitting the dust, from claiming the words entirely. And you do it quietly. The library is long and tall, cold even in summer. Its windows are high and narrow and the floor is stone over wood. The shelves stretch from wall to wall oak, waxed ancient. They smell of time and varnish and pages that have learned to hold their breath. You step inside with a small cloth bag slung over your shoulder. Inside, 2 soft brushes, a pair of cotton gloves, a bottle of lavender oil, and a tightly folded muslin cloth. You start in the west wing, always west to east. You once tried it the other way. It felt wrong. You begin with the top shelf. The ladder creaks as you climb. You reach the first volume of Folio on Land Laws, bound in cracked leather, its title barely visible in gold. You run your brush along the top edge slowly, gently. Years of dust come loose in a soft puff. You don't cough. You've learned to breathe through your scarf when the dust is heavy. Your strokes are deliberate downward, never across, never rushed. Dust floats and then falls. You wipe the spine with the cloth just enough to bring out the lettering. You tilt the book. No mould, no pests. You set it gently back in place and move to the next. You will repeat this process several hundred times before the month is out. Some books feel indifferent to your touch academic cold. Others seem almost grateful. You once brushed a thick Bible so thoroughly that its ribbon marker dropped loose like a sigh of relief. Historians write about the books, the texts, the authors, but never the people who kept them alive, not with reading but with simple, unbroken care. You are one of those people, and your job is more than cleaning. It is observation, stewardship, vigilance. You note the warping of a spine here, a tear along the edge there. You tuck a slip of paper under the volume to be rebound or check for mildew. You keep no ledger. You don't need one. The shelves remember. You work for hours. Each shelf its own world. Some books haven't been touched in a decade. Some were opened just last week and bear the unmistakable scent of pipe smoke and impatient fingers. You never judge. You just dust. You reach the reference corner. A favourite. Full of atlases and maps, their bindings loose, their pages oversized and eager to unfold. You dust the tops, then open one slowly across the reading desk. The map inside shows the coast of Cornwall drawn in 1772. A smudge along the edge, perhaps from ink, perhaps from a teacup long forgotten. You brush it lightly. You do not try to fix it. Some marks are meant to remain. You light a lamp. The windows have gone dark. The silence grows deeper, more meaningful. It's the kind of silence that listens. You pause, stretch your arms, rub your eyes, sip water from your flask, and then you climb the ladder again. You never rush, never skip. Each book matters. Once you came across a volume that had clearly been chewed by a mouse, most likely. A corner missing, a few words lost forever. You repaired what you could, brushed out the droppings, sealed the box, but the book was changed, and yet it remained. There's something poetic about that. Not perfect, but surviving. By the time you reach the final shelf, your fingers are grey with dust. Your back aches. Your scarf smells of lavender and paper. You pack your tools, gently close the last volume, lower the ladder back against the wall. You look out across the room, rows upon rows of stories, laws, letters, sermons, recipes, receipts, romances. All of them still here. All of them still waiting. Because you came. Because someone came. To dust. To touch. To remember. So tonight when the world is quiet and you close your eyes, think of those books. Think of the covers smoothed by hand, the pages spared from rot, the shelf that no one will ever thank you for dusting, and let yourself rest in the knowledge that you didn't write history, you simply kept it breathing. The house is never fully silent, but this hour comes close. The dishes have long been cleared. The drawing room fire has burned down to quiet embers. Footsteps no longer cross the landing above. The gas lamps have dimmed. And yet here you are, moving through the corridor with deliberate quiet. You're not a servant exactly, though you serve. Not a craftsman, though your hands are trained. You belong to a rare breed practitioners of a task that few remember to appreciate, until the consequences of neglect become impossible to ignore. You're a clock winder. Your job is simple, steady, often invisible, but essential. In a house like this, time doesn't keep itself. It must be wound, persuaded, nudged gently forward by human hands. Because without you, every rhythm would slowly collapse. The kitchen would boil too late, the bells would ring at the wrong hour, the master would arrive at church, just in time for the sermon to be over. And so, once a week, always the same night, you make your rounds. You begin in the great hall. The tall case clock there is older than the butler and just as stiff. Mahogany casing a face in gilt brass Roman numerals worn to ghostly outlines. It stands like a sentry, slightly leaning from age, its glass barely holding in the warmth of the hall. You open the front with your gloved hand, gently, always gently. Inside, the air smells of old wood varnish and time itself. You insert your winding key into the iron arbor, brace your other hand against the case and begin to turn. 1 rotation, 2, 3. With each turn, the weights rise imperceptibly, the chains ease upward. The mechanism hums in its own restrained language. You feel the resistance build tension returning to the coils. Not too tight, never too tight. You stop just before the final click. That last inch is always left unwound, an old habit from your mentor who said the world should never be too taut, or it might snap. The hands on the clock tremble ever so slightly as you adjust the time 4 minutes fast as the master prefers. He says it gives the illusion of punctuality. You don't argue. Next, the drawing room. The mantel clock here is French, an ornate piece with brass scroll work and tiny enamel numbers set inside a porcelain face. It's delicate, frivolous. It chimes the quarter hour, though no one listens. Still, it must be kept running. You know its temperament. It favours a slightly firm touch and doesn't like to be tilted. You lift the glass dome, press the key into the rear panel and begin your work. Each turn is smaller, more precise. Tick, tick, tick. The rhythm resumes soft as breath. You test the chime. It sings clear if slightly off pitch. You adjust the hammer by half a degree. The next note is truer. You smile. Move on. You pass through the corridors like a quiet pulse. The morning room has a small carriage clock, brass-cased, brought from Italy decades ago. You wind it with care, noting the faded initials on the base. The library has a ship's chronometer, gifted after a long-ago naval commission, still accurate, still proud. The master bedroom houses a twin-bell alarm clock which, to your knowledge, has never been set. But you wind it anyway, because one day someone will expect it to ring. Historians will write about the clockmakers, the inventors, the engineers who crafted escapements and balances. But they will rarely mention you, the one who kept those devices alive, the one who visited them not in pride or invention, but in maintenance, in service. They should. You've watched time falter. You've heard what silence sounds like when a clock runs down. It's not dramatic. It's not tragic. It's just wrong. Like a heart that forgets what it's for. You once walked into the nursery and found the small tin mantel clock stopped its pendulum, frozen mid-swing. The room felt dimmer. You wound it, set it gently back into motion, and heard the familiar tick fill the space again like sunlight. The child never noticed, but you did. Some clocks are finicky. The one in the maid's stairwell always sticks just past the half-hour mark unless it's tapped twice. The parlour clock gifted to the lady of the house on her wedding day must be wound with gloves or its winding shaft slips from nervous oil. You remember all of this, not because anyone told you to, but because they need you to. You don't carry a ledger. Your memory is your guide. Once you were late, it wasn't your fault the roads were flooded and your horse refused the hill. You arrived 3 hours behind schedule. That evening 4 clocks were still. 2 chimed incorrectly. The dining room clock had even lost its minute hand as if in protest. You stayed up all night putting it right. You never arrived late again. There's a joy in what you do, a deep, unspeakable joy that comes from precision, from touch, from listening to things that have no voice. The moment when a clock ticks back to life beneath your fingers is almost holy, a resurrection not of spirit but of sequence. You do not speak to the clocks, but you think they know you. You treat them kindly. You never force a winding key. You never rush a pendulum. You always wait the full tick before setting the next hand. Time, after all, is not in a hurry. It simply expects you to keep up. You come to your last clock. It rests on a high shelf in the servants' hallway, overlooked by nearly everyone. Small, tin, hand-painted roses flaking at the corners, the second hand long since fallen off. It has no chime, no ornament, but it keeps time, and you wind it just as you did the grand clock in the front hall. 3 turns, pause, set. There's something poetic in that symmetry. You pack away your tools, wipe your hands, close your coat, and as you walk out into the now silent street, you can feel them behind you. The tick of 50 small machines scattered across stairwells and sideboards, all breathing in time again. You didn't invent them, you didn't build them, but you restored their voices. So tonight, when you lie still and hear the faint tick of your own bedside clock, know that every second that follows came because someone made sure it could. You didn't chase time, you kept it from being lost. Evening in the Victorian household isn't declared with trumpets or clocks, but with light. Not the grand lighting of chandeliers, not the clink of gas valves in the drawing room, not even the slow creak of a servant raising the wick of the hallway lamp. No, it begins earlier, subtler, when someone somewhere strikes a match to light a single taper. And more often than not, that taper came from your hands. You are a taper roller, not a full-scale chandler, no open vats of tallow or elaborate candle moulds. Your world is smaller, quieter, and infinitely more delicate. You don't supply ballrooms or banquet halls. You make the humble tapers, the narrow finger-length candles, used to light fireplaces, wax seals, tea kettles, bedside lamps, and the quietest corners of the day. Few in the house know you by name, but they rely on you without realizing it. The wax room where you work is tucked behind the pantry, low ceiling, packed earth floor. The walls are lined with wooden drawers filled with bundles of raw wax, each labelled in pencil. Summer blend, soft pour pure beeswax, cracked edges, leftover ends, domestic use only. A single table runs the length of the room, worn smooth from years of handling. A stove glows low in the corner, not roaring, just warm enough to keep the wax pliable. The scent is unmistakable, honey resin, smoke and faint salt. You roll up your sleeves, tie your apron tight. Begin. First you prepare the wick, cotton twisted, boiled in lie dried over weeks. You cut it in lengths of 6 inches, measuring each against your forearm. Not too long they'll droop, not too short they'll sputter. You wax them lightly between your palms, smoothing down the stray fibres. You line the cut wicks on a cloth. 30 to start, always 30. Then you reach for the wax golden sweet, faintly soft from the heat in the room. You warm a portion in your hands, not enough to melt, just enough to coax pliancy. Your thumbs begin to press it flat evenly, thinly wrapping it around the wick in a slow spiral. The movement is everything. Press, roll, turn. Too firm and the wax cracks, too loose and it flares when lit. You learn the language of beeswax, not with your mind, but with your fingertips. Your tapers are not identical. They are sisters, not twins, each one bearing the nuance of how your hands moved that hour. You don't fight the variation. You respect it. Historians love to write about wax seals and candlelit declarations. They recount midnight letters sent from war fronts, heated debates over brandy by candlelight. But none of those moments could exist without the tapers, without you, without the quiet hands that shaped light in advance. No one thanks you. That's fine. You work in silence. The only sounds are the soft rub of wax against cotton, the occasional pop of the stove, and your own breathing steady, even part of the room now. Sometimes when you roll tapers late into the night, you think about where each one will end up. One might light the master's pipe as he sits alone near the fire. Another might seal a letter to a cousin in Edinburgh, one of those long-winded family updates full of polite lies. A third might be used by the cook to relight the oven when the flame goes out halfway through a tart. And one might be tucked quietly into a nursemaid's pocket used to warm a damp towel in a basin at 3 a.m. for a teething child. Your work doesn't announce itself, but it is everywhere. You remember one winter when a storm swept through and knocked out the gas supply for 2 days. The house was thrown into darkness, and the only light that remained came from the stacks of tapers you'd rolled over the months, dozens of them hidden in drawers and cupboards, waiting quietly to be needed. You came in the next morning to find every table lit by your work, the house alive with the soft, flickering glow of your hands. No one said anything, but you noticed the cook had left a warm roll on your workbench. That was enough. You continue your batch. After every 10 tapers, you rest your hands. Beeswax is forgiving, but your joints are not. You stretch your fingers, roll your shoulders, sip from the tin mug on the shelf, tea long gone cold but still sharp. You light one taper from the batch you just finished. Hold it up. The flame catches, cleanly burns steady without smoke. Success. You snuff it gently with a brass cap. Lay it back on the cloth. Some workers leave their initials in hidden places etched into seams or pressed into fabric. You don't mark your tapers. You wouldn't know how, but sometimes, just sometimes, you tie the bundles with blue thread instead of brown. No one ever mentions it. But the housekeeper always takes those first. You wrap the finished set in wax paper, 6 per bundle tied with twine. You label them neatly in your best handwriting. Fire tapers, desk drawer stock, window shelf reserve. Each bundle is tucked into the cabinet beside the stove where it will be collected by a footman come morning. Your hands smell of honey and cotton. Your apron is dusted with golden shavings. Your back aches but gently. You wipe the table clean, douse the fire, open the door. Outside the wind has risen. It rushes past you, eager to knock out someone's flame. But your tapers are ready. So tonight, when the lights flicker and someone searches for a spark, when fingers fumble for a match and a tiny flame is drawn forward, you'll be there, in that glow, in that moment of relief. You didn't invent fire, but you made it gentle enough to hold. There's a silence that only comes late into the night. Not just absence of noise, but a softness that settles over a house, once all its demands have been met. Fires reduced to glowing embers, boots laid aside, letters written and sealed, the weight of the day packed away beneath pillows and quilts. That's when you begin. You don't need bright light for this work. Just a single oil lamp warm enough to cast golden halos over your tools, but low enough not to startle the materials in your care. You sit alone in the narrow side room near the dressing hall, too small to be a proper workroom, too far from the main corridor for anyone to wander in by mistake. You're a glove stretcher, not a glove maker. You don't craft new leather or cut fine silk. Your task comes later, quietly, privately, when the glove is no longer new, no longer crisp, but not yet past saving. This is where you live in the subtle space between wear and worth. Your bench is clean, always, a flat wooden surface softened by years of elbow rests and linen cloths. Its drawers lined with the familiar tools of your trade-curved ivory stretchers for delicate fingers, brass forms for long gloves, blunt irons for wrist shaping a tin of beeswax polish, and strips of linen to bind softened leather while it rests. The first pair tonight is folded neatly on the bench. Ladies' evening gloves, ivory, elbow length, made of kid leather so fine it breathes like skin. You unfold them gently. The fingertips are rumpled, the wrists slightly wrinkled. They've been worn perhaps to a dinner or a quiet walk around the square. Perhaps the wearer clutched her hands in conversation, not knowing what to say. You slide your fingers inside the glove. It resists, then yields. That's a good sign. Still supple. You begin the work, not with force, but with feeling. The ivory stretcher is shaped like a pair of spoons hinged to spread softly. You insert it into each finger one by one, easing the tight spots, lengthening the line without stretching it thin. You don't pull, you don't bend, you invite the glove to remember the hand it was made for. And somehow, it always does. You rub a touch of wax into the creases, massaging it lightly until the shine returns. Not glossy, just alive. Then you place the glove over the brass form, smooth it from wrist to elbow, and leave it to rest while you work on the next. Some gloves come to you regularly. A valet's Sunday gloves stretch slightly at the knuckle from constant use. A maid's pair made of cotton with worn palms from carrying trays. A riding glove with stains at the thumb, dried mud, or maybe blood. You never ask. Your job isn't to question the life lived inside the glove, it's to care for what remains. The second pair tonight is stiffer, black. Men's formal wear. The sort worn with a frock coat and top hat. Too wide at the wrist, too narrow at the thumb. You know this pair. You've been tending to it for years. You reach for the leather soap, warm a cloth, and begin wiping gently along the seams. You check the stitches still tight. You stretch the thumb pocket slightly with the iron, just enough to keep it from pinching. You turn the glove inside out and find a single loose thread. You knot it, trim it, tuck it back in place. Historians rarely talk about gloves, let alone the ones who care for them. They speak of gowns, of uniforms, of crests and collars. But gloves were the first and last line of presentation. They were the handshake before the words, the concealment of emotion, the gentle rejection, the silent signal, the barrier and the bridge. And when they lose their shape, something subtle is lost. That's where you come in. You once restored a pair of gloves that had belonged to a woman now long dead. They were found at the back of a wardrobe, creased brittle, folded in on themselves like dry leaves. You steamed them, gently reformed the fingers, rehydrated the leather with wax and patience. When the lady's daughter saw them, she cried. Not because they were beautiful again, but because they looked like her mother's hands. You think of that often, not as pride exactly, but as proof that what you do matters, even if no one notices until it's too late. You finish the second pair, set it beside the first, rotate the brass form slightly so the leather cools evenly. You clean your tools slowly. A good glove stretcher never hurries. Speed cracks leather, frays edges. You've seen the damage done by impatience, a well-made glove warped beyond use because someone shoved a hand in too soon, or used water too hot, or thought polish could fix what only time could mend. No, your work is patient, gentle, intentional. You wrap the gloves in tissue, label them, place them in the return box. You run a cloth over your bench, cap the polish, hang your apron. Before you leave, you glance at the rack where gloves hang drying in the dark. 5 pairs, 5 hands waiting to be worn again, each one a whisper of the person who wore it. You wonder sometimes what your hands will leave behind. No memoir, no statue, just gloves that fit again. That didn't crack. That didn't get thrown away. So tonight, when someone slips their hand into a glove that fits perfectly, when the fingers slide in without struggle, when the seam lies flat, when they don't even think about the glove at all, you'll know you've done it right. You weren't seen, but you were felt. You didn't hold their hand, you made sure something else could. The house is asleep now. Truly deeply asleep. No voices in the hall, no coughs from upstairs, no creak of bedposts, no hiss of lamps. Only the soft, steady breath of an estate exhaling the weight of another long Victorian day. But your day is just beginning. You don't make announcements. You don't carry a bell. You slip through the servants' entrance like a thought no one spoke aloud, dressed in plain wool boots laced tight. Your hands are dry. Your back is already braced. You are a floor mat shaker. It's not a job anyone sees. Not unless you're careless. And it's not a job anyone thanks you for. Most don't even think it's a job at all. But when the dust settles, and it always does, someone must shake it loose again. Tonight that someone is you. You start at the threshold macqueer, thick with bristles cut square and heavy browned from rain and polish and boot grease. You lift it from the stones. It groans slightly in protest. The weight is always more than you expect. You carry it out to the yard. The sky above is inky, salted with stars. The garden gate clinks once behind you in the breeze. You prop the mat over the low iron rail, steady it with one hand and lift your beater. Not a broom, not a stick. This is a proper rug beater, willow-framed and looped like a woven figure eight made to break silence without shattering it. You swing it once gently, then again, a third time faster. Dust blooms into the air in soft clouds, fine as flour, grey as chimney smoke. You don't flinch. You've breathed in more soot than any chimney sweep in London, you'd wager. You beat in a rhythm, right, left, edge, centre, wait, repeat. The mat stiffens as it releases its burden. You tap the corners, flip it once, shake it like a tablecloth after a funeral. One final blow, then silence again. You leave the mat on the rail to cool. Yes, cool, because even mats hold heat, especially the thick ones that sleep near fireplaces. You can tell how close a rug lies to a hearth by the smell alone. Back inside, you collect your next. The runner from the corridor is long, narrow and deceptive. At first glance it looks clean, but you know better. You roll it, grip it under your arm and carry it out the side door. It flops across your shoulder like a reluctant animal. You drape it over the wooden line, then begin again. The rhythm changes depending on the mat. Some need firmness, others prefer a kinder hand. The dining room mat is more temperamental. It's older, frayed at the edges, the fringe curled like dry grass. You don't beat it. You whisper to it. Just a few taps. You sweep it gently, then turn it so the worn threads don't fall all at once. You remember the day it was replaced briefly by a newer one, and how everyone kept slipping on it no matter how flat it lay. That newer one was returned within a week. Some things are earned by time. You move room to room like this. Not rushed, not idle. You've cleaned the hall mat so many times you know the exact number of tacks that hold it to the floor, 12. You know which corner always curls after rain. You know the stains that refuse to lift no matter how hard you beat. You've stopped trying. Some marks aren't meant to go. The worst mats are always in the servants' quarters. Not for lack of care, for lack of time. These mats carry everything cinders from the scullery ash from the kitchen hearth. Coal dust, spilled tea soup, splashes, half a dozen crumbs from bread no one had time to eat sitting down. You take extra time with these, not because anyone will notice, but because someone should. Historians never write about mats. They write about floors, the marble of grand ballrooms, the parquet of smoking lounges, but not the worn wool under a maid's boots, the oil-stained canvas by the stable door, the rough jute beneath a writing desk. And certainly not about you. But you notice everything. You see who drags their feet and who walks heavy. You know who wipes their shoes properly and who doesn't bother. You know which guests bring in sand and which children tuck pebbles into their boots like secrets. Once you found a hairpin, 2 beetle wings and a broken cufflink all in the same day. You kept none of it. But you remember. There is a kind of love in this work. A tenderness. You flip each rug over before beating it. You run your hands along the seams. You straighten the fringe when you're done, not because it has to be perfect, but because it should be at peace. Even rugs deserve dignity. You recall one night years ago when you were sick. The head footman cleaned the mats in your place. He beat them too hard, split the hallway runner down the middle, didn't air the parlour mat properly and it mildewed. After that you were never replaced again. You take no pride in that, just quiet assurance. The last mat tonight is from the nursery. Small square printed with a faded pattern of birds and vines. You carry it outside, shake it gently. A dried flower falls out from underneath a daisy pressed flat. You pick it up, turn it over once in your fingers, then slip it into your pocket. You don't know whose it is, but it feels like something to be saved. You return the rugs one by one, smooth them, align the edges, run your foot along the length to check for folds. You don't leave notes, but the house will know. Tomorrow someone will rise early and walk barefoot to the basin. They'll step onto a mat that doesn't crunch or curl. They'll feel softness instead of grit. They won't say anything, but they'll notice. So tonight, when the dust no longer rises in the morning light, when the floor greets the day without complaint and each step feels somehow kinder, Remember, you didn't walk ahead of anyone. You simply cleared the path. Even in the softest hours of the night, something always carries on. The house may be quiet, its hearths cooled, its windows dark, but beneath the stillness there are hands at work. Movements so practiced they make no sound. Tools so familiar they slip from pocket to palm like old friends. And yours are among them. You're a boot polisher, not the boy on the street corner shining for coppers, not the showman with brushes flashing under gaslight. You are quieter than that. You work in the back room off the servants' hallway, no sign on the door, just the scent of leather and turpentine that spills into the corridor like a whisper. This job is not about show, it's about service. Not to masters or mistresses, not exactly, but to the boots themselves. The boots that carry people through weather and wear. The boots that step over thresholds and cobblestones and polished marble floors. The boots that take in the world, then leave it at the door. And you are the one who sees what the rest of the house steps over. You begin, as you always do, by laying out the pairs, 6 tonight, laid in a quiet row on your bench like sleeping horses, all different shapes, all carrying their own tiredness. First the footman's boots, scuffed at the toe, thin across the instep. The leather smells of ash and boiled beef kitchen work mostly. You remove the laces first, setting them aside. You begin brushing them gently, coaxing away the dust and dry mud with long measured strokes. Left, then right. You never mix them. There's dignity in the order. You reach for your tin of black polish, unscrew the lid. The scent hits you, sharp, bitter-sweet. Beeswax and coal oil and something older. You scoop just enough onto your cloth. Press it into the leather with a firm circular motion. The leather darkens. It responds. You know when it's ready. You don't need a timer. You just feel it. You buff with a second cloth, softer, finer. Long sweeps, heel to toe. The boot begins to shine, not garishly, not like a mirror, just enough to catch the light and hold it like a promise in the early morning. You lace them up again, tight, symmetrical. Set them aside. The second pair, the housekeeper's, lower ankle boots, brown leather with a stitched toe cap. These are worn every day, never seen by guests, but essential nonetheless. You notice the left heel is beginning to lean. You make a note in your head someone should see to that. You clean them carefully but without ceremony. Some boots don't want attention, they just want to be ready. You remember when a guest once complimented the master's butler on his polished shoes. Shining like clockwork, the gentleman said. The butler nodded, said nothing, never mentioned your name. You didn't expect him to, because it wasn't for credit, it was for continuity. The third pair is heavier riding boots. They come in caked with dried clay bits of straw caught in the treads. You take your stiff bristled brush and begin to scrape. Not too hard. Let the mud flake naturally. The marks on the side suggest he rode fast today, scuffs from the stirrup, a bit of leather burn near the ankle. You wipe it clean, let the boots breathe. They tell you stories, these boots, of paths taken, of hesitations, of mornings begun in haste, of evenings returned to in silence. You once polished a pair that had blood dried into the welt. You didn't ask. Just softened the leather until it no longer cracked, then buffed until the stain faded, not gone but forgotten by most. But not by you. You still remember how the leather felt under your thumb. The fourth pair, the master's formal boots, black, gleaming, high polished from decades of care. These ones know their own worth. You treat them accordingly. Double layers of wax, circular polish with a lambswool mitt. You use gloves for these, not because they're too fine, but because your fingerprints would leave marks. There's a respect required here. You buff until the light bends along the toe box in one smooth curve. Perfection. The fifth pair is newer, unbroken, stiff, reluctant. You soften them with oil massage the seams. Press with the heel of your hand where the ankle bends. You aren't just polishing, you're shaping, teaching the boot how to move with the foot. It will thank you in a week, you're sure of it. The last pair is yours, work boots, cracked near the sole, the tongue slightly torn. You don't polish them for appearances, you do it to make them last. Because if they fall apart, no one will mend them for you, so you patch the crack. You buff what's left. You treat them with the same care as the masters, because feet are feet, and every step counts. The room smells of oil, wax, leather, smoke. Your hands are blackened at the fingertips. You wipe them on a cloth, then on your trousers, then don't bother anymore. The boots now line the shelf, clean, gleaming ready. You exhale, not because you're done, but because it's finished. There's a difference. You pack away your brushes, cap the tins, fold your cloths. The lamp sputters softly. The floor creaks under your heel. So tonight, when someone steps into their boots and feels them wrap perfectly around the foot, when they glance down and see no crack, no spot, no weakness, they won't think of you. But you'll be there anyway. In the laces. In the gleam. In the way the leather holds its shape just a little longer. You didn't walk the path, but you made sure it could be walked well. By now the stars are fading. The wind has gone still. The oil lamps burn low, their flames dancing faintly against soot-darkened glass. Even the clocks seem to tick more softly out of respect, perhaps for how much has already been done while the rest of the house slept. And still your work continues. Not in the hallways, not in the servants' quarters, not even in the rooms upstairs. Tonight your post is beneath the house, down the narrow stair behind the scullery, past the old coal chute and the rack of winter boots. There in the dim, dry belly of the building, you begin your shift as the coal scuttle filler. You're not the coalman. You don't haul great sacks from carts or shovel tons into cellar vaults. That happens during daylight. Your job is quieter, slower. You don't manage the piles, you manage the handfuls. Because in a house like this, every hearth has a scuttle, and every scuttle must be full before morning. You light the lantern that hangs on the hook near the coal pile. It flickers. The air smells of ash iron and something older, cold. Stone-burnt sap, maybe soot-soaked time itself. You grab the first scuttle. It's from the parlour, long-handled brass dented along one edge from years of use. You run your cloth along the rim to clean it first. Ash gets everywhere otherwise. You dip the small shovel into the pile and begin. Coal is not just black. It glistens in places mica-flecked oily, almost alive in the lantern light. Some pieces are jagged, others smooth. You learn quickly which ones fit well in each scuttle. Too many sharp edges and the lid won't close. Too large and the hearth grates won't hold them. You fill with care. Tap the side to settle the load. Wipe it down again. One down. You continue through the row. Drawing room polished copper, the family crest faintly etched on the side. Library narrow, tall, scarred from having once been knocked over by the dog. Guest bedroom small and plain with a wooden handle worn smooth from nervous hands. Each scuttle has a story. You don't ask for them, but you listen. You once filled the same scuttle every Thursday for 6 years. Then one week it didn't come down. You asked no one. But the week after a new one arrived, slightly smaller, but bearing the same initials on the handle. That was answer enough. Historians never mention the coal scuttles, nor the ones who filled them. They speak of firelight, of roaring hearths, of ladies reading by flickering warmth. But none of that warmth comes without someone somewhere reaching into the black and lifting it by the shovelful. You wear gloves for the larger scuttles, but not always. You like the feel of the coal, cool at first, then warming slightly as your fingers turn it in place. You like the sound it makes as it settles, like distant pebbles shifting in a river. You finish the final scuttle and lift it with both hands. The weight is nothing you can't manage, but you don't rush. A dropped scuttle at this hour would wake the floor above and undo the whole point of this quiet labour. You carry each one back to its place. Tiptoe through the dining room. Set the copper bin beside the hearth. Creep through the drawing room, leave the brass one tucked behind the settee. Place the guest room bin gently on the tile so it will be ready the moment someone stirs and reaches for warmth. You leave no note, no trace. Just a little more readiness than there was before. You return to the cellar, brush coal dust from your coat, wipe down the shovel, douse the lantern, stand for a moment in the darkness. This job is about preparation, about ensuring the day begins with comfort before anyone has to ask for it. You are not the fire, you are not the light, you are the one who makes sure it can happen. So tonight, when someone wakes and finds the grate already set, when they strike a match and hear the coal catch watch, The flames rise and feel the chill begin to break. They won't know who made it so. But you'll know. You didn't bring the fire, but you gave it fuel. The house is nearly waking now. You can feel it in the shift of the air, in the faint creak of floorboards above, in the distant clink of iron from the kitchen range. A maid coughs softly. A door clicks open. The night has not yet ended, but the day has already begun asking questions. You've finished your rounds. Boots shined, gloves shaped, books dusted, mats beaten, coal delivered. Every room touched by your hands, though no one will say so. That's all right. It was never about being noticed. But before you let the dawn claim the rest of the house, you have one final task. A quiet inspection. You move through the hall slowly now. Not to work, but to witness. You check the linen closet. The folds are still sharp, the air scented faintly with lavender and starch. You pass your hand along the stack, still warm from yesterday's pressing. You glance into the library books sitting neatly, spines, brush-nose smudges on the tables. A clock ticks calmly. You step into the drawing room. The rug lies flat, no grit under your heel. The scuttle is full, the grate is laid. You run your finger lightly along the mantel and find no dust. It is ready. The entire house is. You move like a ghost through each room, not to interfere but to assure that everything is in place, that nothing you tended has slipped or scattered, that the rhythm will hold at least for one more day. Then at last you return to your corner. Your coat hangs where it always does. Your tools are clean folded, tucked away. The basin in the servants' hallway is filled with fresh water. You dip your hands, scrub away the last of the wax, the polish, the soot, the dust. The water goes dark. You watch it swirl for a moment, then pull the plug. You dry your hands on a cloth worn soft by repetition, and exhale. Not from fatigue, but from completion. You sit. The first bell of the day rings softly upstairs. The maids will rise. The scullery door will swing open. The kitchen fire will roar to life. Your part for now is done. So let the world go on. Let the boots be worn, the gloves be buttoned, the books be opened, the mats be stepped on. Let the coal burn, and the clocks chime, and the halls echo with another day's business. Because when it all fades again, when the shoes are kicked off, the embers die, the candles burn low, and the rugs grow tired, you'll return. Quietly, without question. With cloth and polish and a rhythm no one hears. So tonight, when the house begins to stir and no one quite knows why, it feels so settled, so soft, so orderly. Remember, you didn't ring the bell. You made sure it was heard. And now, as the fire fades behind your eyes and the long corridors dim in memory, let your breath slow. Let your shoulders soften. You've walked each hallway. You've bent over every bench. You've touched the cloth, the wax, the pages, the brass. You've made boots gleam coals, wait, gloves listen, books breathe. And through it all you never hurried. You never asked for thanks. You simply made ready. So let that readiness settle into your own bones now. You are the last light on, the quiet hum behind every prepared room. The reason morning feels possible. And as the house above creaks into motion, you are already resting. Not with exhaustion, but with certainty. Your work was not glamorous, but it was good. Your hands did not wave banners, but they held the shape of order. So close your eyes now. Sink into the mattress as if it were soft linen you'd just pressed. Let your breath rise and fall like the faint ticking of a library clock. Let your fingers curl gently, still scented faintly of leather and beeswax, and forget the weight of tools. You've done enough. You've made the world ready for someone else's waking. Now sleep. Sleep deeply. Sleep kindly. The quiet will wait for you. End of story. Sweet dreams.